Thank you for downloading the book from the royalib.com free e-library, http://royalib.com. All books by the author, http://royalib.com/author/Yakovlev_Alexander.html. The same book in other formats, http://royalib.com/book/Yakovlev_otekist_Voyna_voyana_otekist_Goddard.html. Enjoy reading. Alexander Yakovlev. Patriotic War of 1812. With the blessing of the Archbishop of Ternopil and Kremenets-Segi. What preceded the responsible war? Napoleon dictates to his secretary. Artist S. Steinben. 1840s. France and the Revolution. France and Russia are almost at opposite ends of Europe. What made the French army go on a campaign to a distant country and on June 12, all dates are given according to the old style, 1812 to cross the border of the Russian Empire? To answer this question, you need to start the story from afar. At the beginning of the 19th century, Europe was going through an era of revolutions. Revolution is the overthrow of the existing government and the violent change in the structure of the state. The most significant and bloodiest of them was the Great French Revolution of 1789, during which the power of the kings from the Bourbon dynasty was destroyed in France and a republic was created instead of a monarchy. Under the slogan, freedom, equality, fraternity, a struggle was launched between the lower classes of society against the first estate, the nobility. The revolution was the beginning of the struggle not only against the monarchy, but also against Christianity. The atheistic spirit of the Enlightenment, hostile to Christian ideas, based on the ideas of Voltaire and Rousseau, began to dominate in the country. Already in February 1790 all the monasteries were closed. In November 1791, a decree on church opposition was adopted, according to which priests who refuse to take the oath of revolutionary power are deprived of all civil rights. View of Paris from the Garden of St. Cloud. As a result, up to 40,000 priests left the country. In September 1792, the monarchy was abolished and the Gregorian calendar was abolished. A new chronology began, not from the Nativity of Christ, but from the first year of the Revolution. Later, instead of a 7-day week, a decade, 10 days, was introduced to destroy the church year. In November 1793, King Louis XVI was executed. The Catholic Church in France ceases to exist. Many Catholic and Protestant priests renounced their priesthood. All churches were closed, and masses, Catholic liturgies, were performed at home, secretly and with mortal danger for both the priest and the laity. Most churches are sold by the state to private individuals, along with all the utensils and valuables. In May 1794 the cult of reason is replaced by the cult of the Supreme Being. Thousands of priests are sent to overseas KN with its murderous climate, and many are simply killed. In February 1795, the final separation of the Catholic Church from the state. In 1797, war was declared on the state of the Pope. Carnival during the First Empire. The activities of the revolutionaries meant more than a simple change in the form of government. It was a daring and arrogant attempt to cross out Christian history and consign Christianity itself to oblivion. The French Revolution rejected God, and made man the sole judge and ruler on earth. However, the growing resistance of the masses forced a change in attitude towards faith. Napoleon took advantage of these sentiments and, after coming to power, restored the position of the Catholic Church in the country and even began to patronize the Pope, who crowned him. He was given the powers of the Emperor of the Catholic world, the right to resolve all controversial church issues at the level of the entire Catholic world. Nevertheless, this did not change the essence of the matter. The power of Napoleon was a product of the revolution. How did it happen? Republican government means the election of supreme power by the people, but in France in 1799 the energetic and talented General Napoleon Bonaparte seized power. In 1804, he declared himself emperor, restored the monarchy, and instead of the overthrown Bourbon dynasty, he set out to establish a new dynasty from his family members in power. In Europe, they looked at the events in France with fear and apprehension. Napoleon destroyed the old orders and introduced new ones. A new set of state laws was adopted, the Napoleonic Code. Industry and trade began to develop faster. He paid much attention to science and education. Under Bonaparte, not only nobles, but also ordinary people were appointed to officer positions in the army. He promoted the capable and talented. For example, he made the former tavern servant Joachim Murat first a general and then a marshal of France. But the borders of France soon became close to Napoleon, who was inhumanly proud and ambitious. He decided to become the ruler of the world. This man possessed the abilities of a brilliant commander. He defeated the armies of most of the small countries of Europe in several battles and subjugated them. He said that he was doing all this for France, but it was he, Napoleon Bonaparte, who was the only absolute ruler of France. No, he conquered foreign lands not for his country, but for himself. Not everything went smoothly with the new ruler. In the south of Europe, Spain did not want to submit to his authority, in which, after the defeat of the Spanish army, ordinary peasants launched a partisan struggle against the invaders. In the west of Europe, England remained impregnable, at that time the richest country in the world, which owned many colonies in the east, had a developed industry and the largest fleet. Napoleon would have crushed her army, but England was located on a large island that separated the wide English Channel from France. In the north of Europe there is a huge Russia, without the conquest of which Napoleon could not have dictated his will to the whole world. French customs officers checked the chest of an overseas merchant, looking for English goods. The French emperor acted decisively. In Spain, he sent his troops to suppress the resistance of the people to his power. Against England, he announced a trade blockade, that is, he forbade all European countries without exception to trade with the island state. This was bound to lead to economic collapse, and then England would have surrendered to the mercy of the ruler of Europe. Revolutionary France and Russia. Russia displeased Napoleon. Russian Emperor Alexander I was afraid of the military power of France, but at first sought to oppose the revolutionary on the throne. Russia, together with Austria and the German states, at that time there was no united Germany, tried to stop Napoleon within the borders of France, but the first commander of Europe defeated his opponents in every battle. He inflicted the most crushing defeat on them at Austerlitz in 1805. Russia had to conclude a peace agreement in the German city of Tilsit in 1807. The agreement was very unprofitable for our country, because it forbade Russian merchants to export grain to England and bring the necessary machines from there. Nevertheless, the Russian government honored the terms of the agreement in the hope that it would stop Napoleon. It wasn't there. Meeting of Alexander I and Napoleon on the Niemen. Russia remained the only country in Europe that did not completely submit to Napoleon, and the Russian army remained the only military force capable of resisting him. The French emperor could not accept this. In 1810, Napoleon began preparations for a campaign against Russia. Through his ambassadors and in letters, he assures Emperor Alexander of his loyalty to the bonds of friendship concluded in Tilsit, but in fact creates the Great Army. Treaty of Tilsit. Fragment. Everything was ready in a year and a half. And then the French emperor found fault with the fact that some Russian ships were transporting English goods, and English ships were calling at the port of Arkhangelsk, and gave the order to start a campaign against Russia. The world held its breath. Why did Napoleon win? The main reason for the general fear of Napoleon was that he had a very strong army, which was considered invincible. This is explained not only by the fact that the French had the best guns, sabers and cannons. The French soldiers were well trained. They were not stupid executors of orders, but they understood what the war was about, how to act in a big battle, when maneuvering or retreating. Napoleon himself made sure that the soldiers were well fed and well treated. For all this, the soldiers loved him. They believed that the whole world would submit to France, and then they would return home with large booty from the conquered countries. Napoleon's army uniform. Marshal of the Empire. Line Infantry Clerk. Private Guards Cavalry Chasseur Regiment. Napoleon surrounded by his marshals and generals. Within the army itself, selected guard units were created, in which Napoleon knew almost all the soldiers by name. It was, as it were, his personal army, his most reliable guard. In addition, Napoleon appointed only capable and talented people to all positions in the army. His corporals, officers, generals, and marshals knew how to fight. All of them were brave people, and the same Napoleon, who was not afraid to go under fire in battle, set an example in this for them. Finally, but not least, we must bear in mind the military genius of Napoleon. This is a special talent, to see a vulnerable spot in the positions of the enemy army located for battle and strike there, or to gather all the forces of your army and break the core of the enemy troops. In several dozen battles, Napoleon did not suffer a single defeat. He always won. What was the strength of Napoleon's power? Waging his wars and conquering European countries one after another, the French emperor was sure of his rear. Why did they accept the power of Napoleon in France, who seemed to have betrayed the ideals of the Great Revolution? The main principle of Napoleon was the principle of force. He created a powerful police ministry, at the head of which he put Joseph Fouché, known for his struggle with the Catholic Church during the years of the Revolution. Fouché created an extensive system of foreign intelligence and internal espionage. He had hundreds of informers in all sectors of French society. Open opponents of Napoleonic power were tracked down and executed on the guillotine, chopped off their heads, or shot. Those who disagreed with such a government could not speak openly in the country. They left for England or Russia. Napoleon's army uniform. Infantryman of the Grand Duchy of Baden. Timbre Major Line Infantry. Private Light Infantry of the French Army. Bust of Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon was cruel. Yes, he took care of his soldiers. After all, they won the world for him. He could be generous, and forgave some of his opponents so that he would be praised in Parisian salons. He loved his country, his relatives, but most of all he loved himself. Tens of thousands of captured soldiers from the armies he defeated were shot on his orders. Hundreds of obvious or imaginary conspirators were executed at his whim, for intimidation. Legion of Honor. And at the same time, France during the reign of Napoleon was rapidly developing along the capitalist path. Industry grew and trade flourished. In addition to internal reasons, this was greatly helped by the fact that from all the conquered European countries everything of value was brought here, from grain, fabrics, gold and silver bars to paintings by great artists. The country grew rich and wanted to become even richer, to become the first power in the world. And while Napoleon was winning, she needed him. What were the goals of Napoleon? Indeed, the conquest of the world. And what did this mean at the beginning of the 19th century? The plan of the French emperor in 1812 was as follows: firstly, to crush the partisan movement in Spain. Secondly, to conquer Russia, and to do this, to defeat its army, to separate Finland, Poland, Lithuania, Ukraine, Moldova, the Caucasus from it, turning the great empire into an obedient vassal state. Thirdly, strike at England from the rear. The English Channel remained an insurmountable obstacle for the French army, but if you capture India, the richest English colony, the proud British will have to submit. A campaign against India was possible through Russia. That is why the conquest of this country was especially important. According to his plans, this was to be the last European war, followed by Asian wars. Did the Russian emperor know about this? Emperor Alexander I, 1801. Of course he did. The whole policy of Napoleon so clearly spoke of his aggressive designs that only a naive person could believe in the peacefulness of the conqueror of Europe. Napoleon, through the adjutant wing of the Russian emperor, asked to convey, if we are in an alliance, the world will belong to us. The earth is like this apple that I hold in my hands. We can cut it in two and each of us will get half. To this, Alexander I replied, at first he will be satisfied with one half of an apple, and then the hunt will come to take the other. He had his own scout in Paris, Colonel A. I. Chernyshев, who obtained important information about Napoleon's military plans. Finally, the most influential Napoleonic minister, Charles Talleyrand, gave important information to Alexander I for a lot of money. M. Talleyrand, 1754 to 1838. In addition, back in 1807, General M. B. Barclay de Tolly outlined to the Tsar his ideas about the inevitable war with Napoleon. Napoleon wins all frontal battles, so it is necessary to use the territorial advantage of Russia, stretch his army for many miles, disperse the combat the energy of the enemy, and after exhausting him, give a pitched battle that will decide the outcome of the war. In 1810, Barclay de Tolly was appointed Minister of War. He developed a program to re-equip the Russian army and strengthen the western borders of the empire along the rivers western Dvina, Berezina and Dnieper. Unfortunately, the program was not fully implemented due to the difficult financial situation of the state, and the construction of military fortifications had just begun. Knowing all this, the Russian emperor tried to avoid war with France or push it back in order to better prepare the Russian army. At the beginning of 1812, Alexander I received Napoleon's special envoy, Count Louis of Narbonne, to whom he said, I will not draw my sword first. I have no illusions and place too high a military talent of Napoleon not to take into account all the risk that the lot of war can expose us to. But I will do nothing inconsistent with the honor of the nation I rule. The Russian people are not one of those who retreat in the face of danger. If all the bayonets of Europe gather on my borders, they will not force me to speak another language. I repeat that I will not draw my sword first, but I will sheath it last. M.B. Barclay 1761–1818. Artist D. Dow. 1829. "Oh, this stubborn one," was all Napoleon said in response to the report of his envoy. Napoleon's army uniform. Corporal of the Line Infantry. Infantry of Württemberg. Private Light Infantry of Württemberg. Invasion of 1812. The feat of the soldiers of General Raevski near Saltanovka. Artist Ed. Samakish. 1912. How did it start? In early June 1812, the French army brought the main forces to the borders of Russia near the Niemen River. On June 10, Napoleon arrived at the troops. He personally reconnoitered the area, driving around the river bank at night in the moonlight. Already in the morning, when the emperor was returning to the main apartment, a hare jumped out from under the bush under the feet of his horse. The horse bounced sideways, and Napoleon, who rode badly, fell. He got up quickly because he didn't even hurt himself. But this incident made a depressing impression on his retinue. "We would have done much better if we had not crossed the Niemen. This fall is a bad omen," said the Prince of Neuchatel. But Napoleon pretended not to hear these words. At the top of his voice, he sang the revolutionary anthem, La Marseillaise, "Enemies of the French, tremble," crossing the Niemen at Pylona. June 30, 1812. By that time it was dawn. The flat bank of the Niemen, trees and bushes became visible. Scouts sent to the other side reported that there were no troops nearby, only a few Cossacks were watching the advance of the French regiments. This surprised Napoleon, who was expecting a meeting with the Russian army and sought to defeat it in the first battle. But he was not used to changing his plans. On the morning of June 12, European reckoning 24, of June, Napoleon's order was read through the companies of the Great Army. "Soldiers, the Second Polish War has begun. Doom entails Russia, her fate must be completed. It puts us before a choice, dishonor or war. The choice cannot be doubted. So, let's go ahead, bring the war into her territory. The Second Polish War will be as glorious for French weapons as the first. But the peace we conclude will be secured and will put an end to the disastrous influence that Russia has been exercising for 50 years on the affairs of Europe." Napoleon's army uniform. Headquarters officer of the 5th Cuirassier Regiment. Cuirassier of the 3rd Cuirassier Regiment. Private of the 1st Light Horse Regiment. Napoleon removed the glove from his right hand and waved it. At this signal, 300 Poles of the 13th Regiment were the first to cross to the other side of the river, followed by the French grenadiers moved to 3 pontoons, floating bridges, already built by sappers across the river. The infantry was followed by the guards, the cavalry, then the artillery, the carts moving last. One of the convoys carried 2 statues of Napoleon, which he intended to put up in Moscow and St. Petersburg. "In less than 2 months," said the French emperor, "Russia will ask for peace." What was the French army like? L.N. Davout, 1770–1823. It was divided into several corps commanded by marshals: Jean Lannes, the son of a groom, a talented commander, a valiant warrior, a kind and honest man who was not afraid to reproach Napoleon for despotism; Louis Davout, a gifted strategist, a skilled administrator, strict to the point of cruelty; Joachim Murat, who was neither a strategist nor a politician, but became one of the best cavalry commanders in Europe, a blue-eyed athlete and a handsome man, always dressed in bright outfits of silk and velvet, and also L. Berthier, M. Ney, N. Soult and others. M. Ney, 1769–1815. In addition to the French regiments, the Grand Army included military formations from Italians, Poles, Swiss, Portuguese, Germans, Austrians and other conquered peoples of Europe. There were separate corps from Prussia, Poland and Austria. The total number of the Great Army was about 600,000 people, including 492,000 infantry, 96,000 cavalry, 20,000 sappers, artillerymen and others. The border was crossed by troops numbering about 440,000 people. Napoleon left the rest in reserve. Napoleon's army uniform. Polish Lancer. Grenadier of the Italian Foot Guards. Private of the Portuguese Infantry. Cuirassier of the Guards Regiment of Saxony. The main forces of the French army were divided into three groups: the left, 218,000 people, commanded by Napoleon himself; the central, 82,000 people, under the command of Napoleon's stepson, Viceroy of Italy, Eugene Beauharnais; and the right, 78,000 people, commanded by his brother Napoleon Jerome Bonaparte, who bore the title of King of Westphalia. Murat, 1771–1815. L. Berthier, 1753–1815. What was the Russian army like? By this time, Russia had managed to increase the strength of its army. In May 1812, the war with Turkey ended and peace was concluded, and in March a secret treaty was signed with Sweden. All this made it possible to be calm beyond the southern and northwestern borders, although Russian regiments remained there. On the western borders of Russia there were three armies, numbering only about 240,000 people. The First Army, 127,000 people, was commanded by General M.B. Barclay de Tolly; the Second Army, 46,000 people, General P.I. Bagration; the Third Army, 44,000 people, General A.P. Tormasov. Riga was covered by a separate corps, 18,500 people, of General P.K. Essen, and the St. Petersburg direction was covered by a corps, 20,000 people, of General P.X. Wittgenstein, separated from the First Army. On the southern border stood the Danube Army under the command of Admiral P.V. Chichagov. M.I. Platov, 1751–1818. Artist D. Dow. 1820s. P.H. Wittgenstein, 1769–1843. Artist D. Dow. 1823. The Russian army was inferior to the enemy in numbers, partly in planning and organizing the deployment of troops. However, in the number and quality of artillery pieces, in the training of cavalry formations, in combat training, we were not inferior. Finally, the Russian soldier, of course, was not inferior to the French in his fighting spirit. He was ready to fight to the last breath for his fatherland, for his land and faith. Russian commanders were very different. The Minister of War at that time was Mikhail Bogdanovich Barclay de Tolly, an impoverished descendant of Scottish nobles who had long ago moved to Russia. He reached the highest military ranks thanks to his talents, diligence and the trust that Alexander I had in this courageous and noble general. A deep strategist, he thoughtfully analyzed the state of affairs and made a decision, which he then firmly implemented. P.I. Bagration, 1765–1812. Unknown painter. 1830s. A.P. Tormasov, 1752–1819. Artist K. Reichel. 1813. A.I. Kutaisov, 1784–1812. Artist D. Dow. 1820s. D.S. Doktorov, 1756–1816. Unknown painter. 1810s. P.P. Konovnitsyn, 1764–1822. Artist L. St. Auburn. 1813. In contrast to the cold-blooded and restrained Barclay de Tolly, another commander, Prince Pyotr Ivanovich Bagration, was of a hot temper. A descendant of the Georgian kings, he gained combat experience with the great Suvorov, who considered him his favorite student. Ardent both in conversation and in battle, a master of attack and maneuver, Bagration was known as the idol of a soldier. A.P. Ermolov, 1777–1861. Artist D. Dow. 1823. Generals P.P. Konovnitsyn, M.I. Platov, D.S. Doktorov, A.P. Ermolov and other generals served under the command of Barclay de Tolly and Bagration. One of this brilliant galaxy, Alexander Ivanovich Kutaisov, an outstanding artilleryman and versatile talented person, knew 6 languages, wrote poetry, and drew well. The plan of the Russian command was to retreat from the border to a specially prepared and fortified camp in Drissa, in which the First Russian Army was to stop the enemy, and the Second Russian Army was to deliver a flank attack to him. How did the Russians meet the French invasion? Emperor Alexander I was at a ball in the suburbs of Vilnius, arranged in his honor by Russian officers, when he was informed of the French invasion. The sounds of beautiful music sounded in the hall, lit by candles. Figures of dancers glided along the smooth parquet, ladies in light dresses and their gentlemen, most of whom were military men in multicolored uniforms of their regiments, as well as representatives of the Polish and Lithuanian nobility in black tailcoats, form of the Russian army. Private Lifeguard Semyonovsky Regiment. Staff Officer of the Life Guards Horse Regiment. Chief Officer and Bombardier of the Guards Foot Artillery. At a sign from the Tsar, the conductor cut off the music. The Tsar addressed the frozen dancers with the following words: "The enemy entered Russia with great forces. He goes to ruin our dear fatherland. May the destruction into which he beckons us to be cast down upon his head turn." In all cities and villages, the words of the Tsar became known: "Warriors, you are defending faith, fatherland, freedom. For a beginner, God. I swear that I will not lay down my arms until the last enemy soldier leaves the fatherland." Of course, the Russian emperor was not going to fight the conquerors with a sword in his hand. His duty was to manage the Russian Empire entrusted to him, which had to be saved. On the morning of June 14, Alexander I left for the headquarters of the First Army, located 100 kilometers from the Niemen. He sent General A.D. Balashov to Napoleon with a proposal to peacefully resolve the conflict. Barclay de Tolly, according to the existing plan, led the army to the Drisky camp, and sent an order to General Bagration to retreat to Minsk to join the First Army. Marshal Davout threw all his troops to deliver a crushing blow to the Russian army near Vilna. But the blow fell on an empty place. The Russian troops managed to get away from the superior French army. On June 16, Napoleon arrived in a deserted Vilna. General Balashov vainly conveyed the message of Alexander I. Napoleon did not want to hear about the world. How wonderful his reign could have been, the warlike emperor reasoned, turning to the king's envoy, if he had not broken with me. But in the end, I'm not angry with him for this war. Another war is another triumph for me. A.D. Balashov at Napoleon's. Artist A. Yakovlev. 1973. The Russian campaign was planned to be completed within a month. We must end this campaign with one thunderous blow. Napoleon ordered. In the circle of his marshals, Napoleon spoke bluntly: "Alexander is mocking me. Does he think that I entered Vilna to negotiate trade agreements? I have come to put an end to the northern barbarian colossus once and for all. The sword is out of its sheath." March of the Pinot Division. July 16, 1812. Alexander is frightened and wants to make peace, but I will sign the peace in Moscow. We must throw them back into their ice, so that for 25 years they do not interfere in the affairs of civilized Europe. Civilization rejects these inhabitants of the north. Europe should get along without them. He wished for war. He had already seen how his troops entered Moscow and St. Petersburg with a swift and victorious march. He seemed intoxicated, recalled the French minister Armand de Caulaincourt. "Fear, O host of foreigners! Russia's sons moved. Rebelled and old and young, fly on the daring. Their hearts are kindled with vengeance. Wake up, tyrant! The hour of fall is near. You will see a hero in every warrior. Their goal is either to win, or to fall in the heat of battle. For Russia, for the holiness of the altar. A.S. Pushkin. Memories in Tsarskoye Selo. Napoleon's army uniform. Line infantry officer. Private line infantry. Line infantry drummer. Why did the Russian troops retreat? Barclay de Tolly knew about Napoleon's military tactics. Having gathered all the forces of the French army into one fist, hit the enemy army and defeat it in a general battle, then finish off the remaining troops, enter the capital and demand complete surrender from the authorities. This is how the French emperor acted earlier. And he dutifully brought the keys to Berlin, Vienna, and other European cities. That is why the main task of the Russian Minister of War considered the connection of the main military forces of Russia, so that they would not be defeated separately. Barclay de Tolly persuaded the king to leave the Drissa camp, the fortifications in which were weak, and went to Vitebsk. Russian troops retreated into the interior of the country, striking at the enemy and holding back his advance. The honor of the first victory in this war fell to the lot of General Tormasov near Kobrin, where on July 15 he took by surprise and forced the brigade of the Saxon Corps Rainier to lay down their arms. The Russians lost 259 killed, the French 1,500, and 2,500 were taken prisoner with 4 banners and 8 guns. The Austrian Corps of Schwarzenberg went to the rescue of Rainier. On July 18, 1940,000 Austrians and Saxons attacked 18,000 Russian soldiers. Tormasov held out all day and retreated to Lutsk, leaving no trophies to the enemy. One can also recall the stubbornness of the defenders of the Bobruisk fortress, in which a 10,000-strong garrison, blockaded by the French, held the defense in the rear of the Great Army for 5 months, which fettered its significant forces and made communications difficult. Russians in 1812. Artist K. Przemysławski. 1855. The enemy was strong. The troops of Marshal Davout captured Minsk and closed the Russian way to the north. Then Bagration took the direction of Bobruisk. His position turned out to be especially difficult because Napoleon decided to cut off the Second Army from the main forces and destroy it. But Napoleon's brother Jerome Bonaparte, who commanded 3 corps, was 4 days late, and Bagration's army was able to break out of the encirclement. Hussar Junction. Artist A. Safonov. 1912. Alexander I did not possess military talents. He felt that his presence embarrassed the generals. On the night of July 6 to 7, the Tsar, on the advice of Admiral A. S. Shishkov and General A. Arakcheev close to him, left the army and went to Moscow. Russian generals sought to preserve the strength of their armies, so they avoided battles. Napoleon's troops overtook the First Army at Polotsk and Vitebsk, but Barclay de Tolly, with skillful maneuvering, took his divisions out of the attack. The experience and skill of Bagration allowed him to escape from the new trap set by Marshal Davout near Mogilev, cross the Dnieper and go to Smolensk. We retreated silently for a long time. It was annoying, they were waiting for the battle. The old people grumbled. What are we? For winter quarters? Do not dare, or something, commanders. Aliens tear up their uniforms. About Russian bayonets? M.U. Lermontov. Borodino. Persecution by Russian horse guards of French horse rangers near Polotsk. Artist F. Churka. 1890. Napoleon's hopes to wedge between the armies of Barclay de Tolly and Bagration, impose major battles on them and defeat them one by one, failed. Napoleon's blows fell on an empty place. It was a shame to retreat without a fight, but that was the order. Long columns of horsemen, Russian cavalrymen, hussars, cavalry guards, cuirassiers, dragoons and Cossacks, stretched along dusty roads among golden fields. There were regiments of army infantry. Wagon trains with infirmaries, bakeries and ammunition rolled. On July 22, both Russian armies joined at Smolensk. Why was the general battle not given at Smolensk? Each general uses the forces and opportunities that he has. Even the united 1st and 2nd Russian armies together remained weaker than the Great Army. From August 4 to 6, the corps of Generals Raevsky and Dokhtyarov defended Smolensk, covering the withdrawal of the main forces of the Russian army. The French artillery was constantly firing, and the city was on fire. When Napoleon arrived under the walls of Smolensk, dreaming of repeating the success of Austerlitz, Barclay de Tolly again led the Russian regiments away from his blow. D. P. Neverovsky, 1771 to 1813. Napoleon knew about his superiority and strove for a general battle with the Russian army. He decided to bypass Smolensk and go to the rear of the Russian troops. The Emperor moved the corps of Marshal Ney and Murat's cavalry, but this was prevented by the troops of the 27th Division of D. P. Neverovsky. A fierce battle took place near the village of Krasno. 7,000 Russian soldiers with 7 guns with unprecedented persistence of the French fought off enemy attacks, 23,000 people, including 15,000 cavalrymen, with 60 guns. After the battle, only a sixth of the division remained, which broke through the enemy ring and joined the main forces in Smolensk. Neverovsky retreated like a lion, the French admitted. Barclay de Tolly had his own far-sighted calculation. He knew that the Napoleonic army was weakening as it advanced through Russia. The French had to leave garrisons in all major settlements, there were many sick and wounded, there were killed, and all this reduced the size of the army. The convoys did not keep up with the movement of troops, and the local population did not want to feed the invaders and give hay to their horses. Many residents left their houses, or even burned them, and left with the retreating Russian army. Battle of Red. A peasant steals a cannon from the French. Therefore, already in the first 2 weeks in the Great Army, the soldiers were starving, the wounded in hospitals did not have enough dressings. Discipline began to weaken, crowds of marauders appeared, more and more soldiers deserted. Belarus and Lithuania were teeming with crowds of deserters engaged in looting. A significant part of the horses, more than 10,000, especially in wagon trains and artillery, fell from starvation, and horse units had to be mixed. In mid-June, when crossing the Niemen, 301,000 people were in the main forces, a month later, 185,000, and after Smolensk, 135,000. The great army quickly melted away without a fight. We were like a ship without a compass, lost in the vast ocean, and did not know what was happening around us, Armand de Caulaincourt later recalled. The captured Russian peasants did not want to tell the French which road the Russian regiments were retreating, or indicated the wrong direction. The lack of information also complicated and slowed down the advance of the French troops. At a military council in Smolensk, Murat advised Napoleon not to go further, but he only sent a letter to the Tsar with a proposal to make peace. Alexander I did not answer. In those days, throughout Europe, bulletins of the Grand Army written by Napoleon were distributed, in which he announced his successes. No one doubted the victory of the French in this war. One of the outstanding state minds, Austrian Foreign Minister Metternich stated, "I do not count on any firmness on the part of Emperor Alexander." However, in the army and in Russian society, dissatisfaction with the retreat was ripening, which was seen as shameful. In the drawing rooms of the nobility, phrases were repeated from a letter from General Bagration to Arakcheev, "The minister in the most skillful way leads a guest to the capital, Moscow. If it has already gone like this, we must fight while Russia can and while people are on their feet, for now the war is not ordinary, but national, and we must maintain our honor and all the glory." The whole army is crying completely and scolding him to death. Meanwhile, the war was taking on a protracted character, and this was what Napoleon feared most of all. How did Russia meet the war? In those days, in all Russian churches, priests from the Ambo read the appeal of the Holy Synod, from the time when the French people, blinded by the dream of liberty, overthrew the throne of autocracy and Christian altars, the avenging hand of the Lord visibly weighed down first over him, and then, through him and together with him over those peoples who followed his retreat the most. The God-saved Church and the Russian state has hitherto been for the most part a compassionate spectator of other people's disasters. Now this time of temptation concerns us, Russians. The power-hungry, insatiable enemy who does not keep oaths and does not respect the altars, breathing as much poisonous flattery as fierce malice, encroaches on our freedom, threatens our homes, and stretches out a predatory hand on the splendor of God's temples even from afar. For this reason we appeal to you, children of the Church and Fatherland. Alexander I arrived in the capital late in the evening on July 11 and stopped at the Kremlin. It can be assumed that he fearfully expected his meeting with patriotic Muscovites. But by the morning of the next day, thousands of residents filled the Kremlin. The Tsar went out onto the Red Porch at 9 a.m. and was greeted with loud cheers of the people and the ringing of Ivan the Great and all Moscow bells. Leaving the porch, he could hardly get through the dense crowd to the Assumption Cathedral, where, after the liturgy, a prayer service was served for the granting of victory to the Russian army. Lord God of strength! Archbishop Augustine Vinogradov said a prayer. Behold the enemy, confuse your land, and if you want to lay the whole world empty, rise up against us. Arise to our help, let them be ashamed and put to shame, thinking evil to us, and let your mighty angel offend and persecute them. Metropolitan Platon, Levshin. From the elder Metropolitan Platon, Levshin, of Moscow, who was in the Trinity Sergius Lavra, Alexander Pavlovich was given an icon of Saint Sergius of Radones, an ancient letter with the Metropolitan's foreshadowing, a meek faith. This sling of Russian David will suddenly strike down the head of the bloodthirsty head of Napoleon. Alexander from emotion left the cathedral in tears. When the king appeared on the porch of the cathedral, they shouted from the crowd, "Lead us, our father. We die or win." This made a very strong impression on the sovereign. "I will never forget this day," he repeated several times. Alexander I met with the Moscow nobility and merchants. The nobles pledged to field 80,000 militia warriors. The richest Moscow landowners P. Demidov, Count P. S. Saltykov and 20-year-old Count Alexander Matveevich Dmitriev Marmanov organized regiments with their own money and kept them until the end of the war. In total, Moscow nobles donated about 3 million rubles during the war, and merchants, more than 10 million. Manifesto on the creation of the militia of July 6, 1812. The same was true of the men. It is known from documents that the peasants of the Tambov province danced for joy when they were recruited, knowing that there was a war ahead, and maybe death. A similar patriotic upsurge grew throughout Russia. All the people stood up to help the Russian army, the form of the Russian militia. Chief officer and foot Cossack of the Vladimir militia. Huntsman, foot and horse Cossacks of the Tver militia. Foot and mounted Cossacks of the Ryazan militia. Blessing of the militiamen of 1812. What was Russia like at that time? In that era, between the tops and bottoms of the Russian people lay a deep abyss, created 100 years ago by Peter I. It was Peter who carried out forced westernization in Russia, abandoned old Moscow and built a new capital closer to the western borders. He introduced Western customs, manners, fashions, values, culture and even language. A gulf arose between the tops and the bottoms of the people. Since then, the nobility began to speak more French, while others did not know the Russian language well at all. These Russian French despised their country, in which they had the misfortune to be born. And Russian men and women continued to wear Russian clothes, speak Russian, sing Russian songs, go to church, and remain faithful to the traditions and customs of their ancestors. The preservation of this position became possible due to the unequal rights of the nobility and the peasantry. The main feature of Russia at that time was serfdom, according to which about 20 million people of the peasant population were the actual and formal property of several tens of thousands of landowners from the nobility, who owned not only land, estate, but also some thousands of serf souls. The serfs did not have the right of personal freedom. They were obliged to work for their master, but at the same time they all had their own household, a hut, a horse, a cow, sheep. The smartest of them, having accumulated money, redeemed themselves and became merchants, industrialists, owners of taverns and inns. More than once, over the centuries, peasant revolts for freedom broke out, but the authorities suppressed them. The militias are preparing fortifications for the Russian troops. Artist P. Pinkisevich. 1950s. At the beginning of his reign, Alexander I had the idea that it would be necessary to free the peasants, but he did not dare. He was afraid of the wrath of the noble landlords. He knew that the revolutionary emperor had destroyed the last remnants of serfdom in Europe, and now he feared that Napoleon would try to raise the peasants in Russia against the nobles. Napoleon, on the other hand, considered the Russian peasants stupid cattle and did not attempt to abolish serfdom in the territories he had occupied. And how did the men behave? In early July, the landowner Dmitry Alexeyevich Yankov hastily arrived in his village in the Tula province. After the service in the church, he called everyone to his house and went out onto the porch. "My friends, we are in danger," Yankov said. "The French are coming to Russia. We must serve the Tsar and the fatherland, defend the Orthodox faith." The Moscow nobility decided to give 10-1 to the militia. "I don't want to captivate anyone, and whoever wishes with good will, let them become, especially those wishing to become warriors separated from the crowd, something a lot. We need 32 people," Yankov said. "I don't take it upon myself to send another under a bullet, but you pray and cast lots." That's what the men did. No one was offended, neither to those who went to war, nor to those who remained. The form of the Russian militia. Warrior and chief officer of the merchant and petty bourgeois hundreds of the Moscow militia. Mounted Cossack of the Moscow militia. Foot Cossack and huntsman of the Moscow militia. Pitched battle. Attack of the Life Guards of the Lithuanian regiment. Artist Ed. Samakish. 1912. How did Kutuzov become commander-in-chief? After the two Russian armies united, the question arose about the commander-in-chief. Bagration was skilled in battle, loved by the soldiers, but too hot. Barclay de Tolly was considered more experienced and wiser, but he was criticized in the army and among the people for his retreat. He was not trusted because of a non-Russian surname. God alone knows what Barclay de Tolly was going through when, during the tour of the regiments, his greetings remained unanswered. In patience and silence, this great commander endured insults, sacrificing his pride and his reputation for the sake of saving the army, and therefore Russia. M. I. Kutuzov, 1745–1813. Arrival of M. I. Kutuzov in Sarajevo Zaimish. Artist S. Gerasimov. 1953. Alexander Pavlovich did not stand up for his minister, although he continued to highly appreciate him and, of course, remembered the plan of 1807. The king wanted to ward off the general dissatisfaction with the unsuccessful course of the war. "Oh, unfortunate leader! Your lot was harsh. You sacrificed everything to a foreign land for you, impenetrable to the gaze of wild mob. You walked alone in silence with a great thought. And, in your name, the sound is alien dislike. Chasing you with their cries. The people, mysteriously saved by you. Cursed over your sacred grey hair, A.S. Pushkin. Commander, the noble societies of St. Petersburg and Moscow proposed to put Kutuzov at the head of the Russian army. The king did not like this general, but was forced to obey the general voice. M.B. Barclay de Tolly, 1761–1818. On August 8, Kutuzov was appointed commander-in-chief. The old general set a condition, the leaving of the army by the Tsar's brother, Tsarevich Konstantin Pavlovich. After all, I can neither punish him if he behaves badly, nor reward him if he shows himself well, Kutuzov explained to the king. 3 days later, the general held a prayer service in the Kazan Cathedral in St. Petersburg and left for the army. It would seem that the arrival of one person in the army can change. This is not a battery of new guns and not a cavalry regiment, and yet the arrival of Kutuzov strengthened the Russian army. Everyone believed in his wisdom and firmness. The soldiers rejoiced. Immediately a saying was born, Kutuzov came to beat the French. General Mikhail Illarionovich Kutuzov was one of the oldest and most experienced commanders of the Russian army, a wealthy landowner and a well-born nobleman. His combat experience was half a century, and he became a general before Napoleon became a lieutenant. Kutuzov was in many battles and more than once looked death in the face, was seriously wounded twice. At the age of 28 he lost his right eye, knocked out by a Turkish bullet. Kutuzov fought together with Suvorov, who considered him his first associate. In addition, Kutuzov proved to be not only an experienced and wise military leader, but also a brilliant diplomat. At the beginning of 1812, he victoriously ended the war with Turkey and concluded a peace treaty beneficial for Russia in Bucharest. On August 16, Kutuzov arrived at the headquarters of the Russian army. He approved the order of Barclay de Tolly to retreat, but firmly decided to give Napoleon a pitched battle. The battle was unnecessary from a strategic point of view, but he could not refuse it for moral and political reasons. Unlike Napoleon, he knew that such a battle would not decide the outcome of the war, but this was what the army wanted, this was expected by the people. It was necessary to inflict a strong blow on the enemy. General view of the battlefield near Moscow from the village of Borodino. September 6, 1812. Artist A. Adam. 1830s. Why did Kutuzov choose the Borodino field? The great army marched on Moscow. Napoleon talked about the goals of the offensive as follows: if I capture Kiev, I will hit the Russians in the legs; if I take Petersburg, I will hit them in the head; but if I enter Moscow, I will hit them in the heart. At that time, Moscow was the second capital, but remained the spiritual center of Russia. To conquer it meant to conquer the country, so thought the French emperor. In addition, it was more profitable from Moscow than from St. Petersburg to go on a trip to India. That is why the French army was marching along the new Smolensk road to Moscow. The battle cannot be given simply in an open field. An experienced commander chooses, if he can, such a place where the disposition of his troops would be the most advantageous and where the possibilities for the enemy's offensive would be the most difficult. When Kutuzov examined a vast field near the village of Borodino, he ordered the army to take positions and build fortifications. He found a place to fight. The Borodino field is located near the city of Mozhaisk, 120 kilometers from Moscow. On a relatively narrow front, this position immediately blocked two roads to Moscow, the old Smolenskaya and the new Smolenskaya, which connected at Mozhaisk. From the right flank, the Russian positions were covered by the Kolocha River, which flows into the Moscow River. By the end of summer, the river had already become shallow, but its banks were steep and precipitous. The hilly terrain of the Borodino field with streams and ravines made it possible to create strongholds on the heights, install artillery batteries and hide part of their troops from the enemy. The field was overgrown in places with shrubs and small forests, and from the south and east it was bordered by continuous alder and birch forests. Kutuzov ordered to further strengthen the position. Several ramparts were poured on the right flank and artillery positions were set up there. On the central hill of the field, by order of General Raevsky, an artillery battery of 18 guns was also placed, pouring an earthen parapet 2 meters high around. On the left flank, on the open plain, near the village of Semyonovskaya, the soldiers built flashes, corner earthen fortifications for artillery batteries, and in front of positions near the village of Shavardino, a redoubt, a rectangular structure that plays the role of an independent stronghold in defense. The terrain forced the French in a narrow area to attack the Russian troops in the forehead, overcoming the steep banks of the Kolocha, and in the center and on the left flank to advance under the fire of Russian guns. How were the Russian troops organized? Kutuzov placed the more numerous and stronger First Army on the right flank, and the Second Army on the left flank. The headquarters was located in the center of the location of the units of the First Army. In the second echelon, the commander-in-chief placed reserves, infantry and cavalry units. By this time, the size of the Russian and French armies was almost equal. The French had about 135,000 men and 587 guns, while we had about 132,000 men and 624 guns. But you need to know that the entire French army consisted of regular soldiers who had combat experience and were well armed, and in the Russian army 28,000 people were militias, yesterday's peasants who did not know how to fight and armed with homemade pikes and sabers. The Cossacks, numbering 11,000 people, were also an irregular army that did not undergo military training. Plan of the Battle of Borodino on August 26, 1812. Made by Russian officer E. Traskin. 1812. Appeal of M. I. Kutuzov to the troops on the eve of the Battle of Borodino. Artist Y. Atlanov. 1982. Not only peasants, but also nobles went to the people's militia. The famous poet Vasily Andreevich Zhukovsky, who taught the Tsar's wife the Russian language, Empress Elizaveta Alexeyevna was a German princess by birth, never served in the army, but considered it his duty to take a personal part in the defense of the motherland. 16-year-old boys ran away from home to defend the fatherland. At that time, the young Lieutenant Alexander Alexandrov became the permanent orderly of Kutuzov. Under this name the noble daughter Nadezhda Durova was hiding. The younger brothers of the Tsar, the 16-year-old Grand Duke Nikolai, future Emperor Nicholas I, and the 14-year-old Grand Duke Michael were very eager to join the army, but Alexander I said that they were still too young to fight Napoleon. Smolensk, icon of the Mother of God. 17th century. Smolensk. Many students of Moscow University became militias, and the medical faculty was simply closed because all medical students went to the army. The militia included students, seminarians, Philistines, and artisans. Of these, 12 regiments totaled 30,000 people, although Kutuzov expected about 100,000. On the eve of the battle, Kutuzov examined his troops. Always modestly dressed, this time he was in full dress uniform with all orders. His speech to the soldiers, officers, and generals was simple: brothers, you will have to defend your native land, serve faithfully to the last drop of blood. I hope for you. Russian soldiers were preparing to fight to the death. On August 23, a prayer service was served at the positions and a precious image, the Smolensk icon of the Mother of God, was carried around the positions of the troops. The soldiers put on clean shirts, confessed and took communion. General Kutaisov gave the following order to the artillery of the First Army: confirm in all companies that they do not withdraw from their positions until the enemy sits astride the guns. Artillery must sacrifice itself. Let them take you with guns, but fire the last shot at point-blank range. It was passed from mouth to mouth that during the detour by Kutuzov of the Russian troops, an eagle flew over his head smoothly, and the soldiers with a deafening hurrah hailed this happy omen. I scored a charge in the cannon tight. And I thought, I will treat a friend. Wait a minute, brother Muzu. What is there to be cunning, perhaps for battle? We will go to break the wall. Let's keep our heads up. For my family, I lay down to take a nap at the gun carriage. And it was heard before dawn. How the French rejoiced. But our open bivouac was quiet. Who cleaned the shower all battered? Who sharpened the bayonet, grumbling angrily? Biting a long mustache. M.U. Lermontov. Borodino. Form of the Russian Army. Staff officer and non-commissioned officer of foot artillery. Chief officer and bombardier of the Guards Foot Artillery. Bombardier and fireworks of Army Foot Artillery. How did the French troops prepare? When Napoleon was informed that the Russian army was no longer retreating, but preparing for battle, he was very happy. He longed for a general battle for a long time and did not think about the possibility of failure. Napoleon in a tent at night. Artist K. Steiben. 1846. Napoleon's plan was as follows: to crush the less strong wing of the Russians, transfer troops to the center and strike with all their might, break through the center, drive the Russians into a bag at the confluence of the Moscow and Soloka rivers, and finally defeat them there. The way to Moscow was opened. From there, Bonaparte intended to dictate to the Russian Tsar his terms of peace. The French Emperor, therefore, counted on the complete defeat of the enemy. Napoleon's headquarters was in the village of Valuevo. The Emperor was absolutely sure of victory. On the eve of the battle, Napoleon's order was announced to all French regiments and squadrons: warriors, here's the fight you've been longing for. Victory is in your hands. She will bring us abundance, good winter quarters, and a speedy return to the fatherland. Later, posterity will proudly remember your exploits on this day, and say about you, he was in the great battle under the walls of Moscow. Napoleon's army uniform. Surgeon First Class. Sergeant Voltigeur of the Line Infantry. Foot Artillery Officer. Artilleryman of the Corps of General Poniatowski. Shevardino. The general battle was preceded on August 24 by the battle for the Shevardinski Redoubt, which defended the left flank of the Russian army. 8,000 infantry, 4,000 cavalry, and 36 guns located inside heroically repulsed attacks of superior enemy forces throughout the day. 30,000 infantry, 10,000 cavalry, and 186 guns. Well, it was a day. Through the flying smoke, the French moved like clouds. And all to our redoubt. Lancers with colorful badges. Dragoons with ponytails. All flashed before us. Everyone has been here. You will not see such battles. Banners were worn like shadows. Fire gleamed in the smoke. Damask steel sounded, buckshot screeched. The hand of the fighters is tired of stabbing. And prevented the nuclei from flying. A mountain of bloody bodies. M.U. Lermontov. Borodino. Murat threw back part of the Russian cavalry, and General Campan, after artillery preparation with 5 infantry regiments, went on the assault and, after a stubborn bayonet battle, took the redoubt. The French were surprised to say that the Russian gunners did not run, although they had this opportunity. They fought hard and were slaughtered on the spot. Attack of the Shevardinski Redoubt. Artist Ed. Samakish. 1910. Napoleon got his way, but at what cost? The Shevardinski Redoubt and the surrounding area presented a picture worse than which it is hard to imagine. The approaches, ditches, and the inner part of the fortification hid under a mountain of the dead and dying. The ground was not visible. The bodies in 6 or 8 rows were piled one on top of the other. The guns fell silent, and in the deafening silence the wheezing and groans of the dying Russians and French were heard. The Shevardinski battle was also important for Kutuzov. He made it possible to complete the work on strengthening the artillery batteries, and in addition, showed that Napoleon's main forces were aimed at the center and left flank of the Russian army. The location of the Russian and French troops at the beginning of the Battle of Borodino on August 16, September 7, 1812. Napoleon in the evening refined the plan of action with his marshals and generals. He often looked in the direction of the Russian troops, fearing, had Kutuzov left. But the Russian army remained in place. Napoleon, with a cold, hardly went to bed, despite his great fatigue and excitement. Main battle. The sun rose early, but Napoleon, dressed in a simple grey frock coat and cocked hat, was already on his feet. Here it is, the son of Austerlitz, he exclaimed pathetically, proud of himself. The battle began at 5:30 in the morning on August 26 with an attack by the troops of Eugene Beauharnais on the village of Borodino. Immediately, General Barclay de Tolly went to the place, deeply suffering from the fact that he was removed from the post of Minister of War. They consider him almost a traitor. He did not seek death, but he did not fear it either. 3 horses fell under him, but the bullets did not touch him. The attack was repulsed. E. N. Bogarnet, 1781–1824. The Polish lancers under the command of Marshal Poniatowski struck around the left flank. The attack also turned out to be fruitless, but fettered part of the forces of the reserve corps of General Duchkov. Half an hour later, the attacks of the main forces of Napoleon on the Semyonov flushes began. Napoleon concentrated most of his artillery against the flèches, and 100 guns opened up with heavy fire. The marshals who survived this day spoke with delight about the amazing fearlessness of the Russian soldiers at the Semyonov flushes until the end of their lives. The French did not yield to them. It was here that Bagration's death cry was heard towards the French grenadiers, who, under a hail of buckshot, fled to the attack with bayonets at the ready, without firing back. Bravo! Bravo! A few minutes later, he was mortally wounded by a shell fragment, and this became a significant loss for the army. Bagration's last words were, "Tell General Barclay that the fate of the army and its salvation depend on him." God bless him, the mortal wound of General Bagration on the Borodino field. Artist A. Vapkvadze. 1948. Soldiers of the Corps of Marshal Ney went into the first attack, but Russian artillery stopped them. Soon the second wave of offensive began. The Russians repulsed the attack with a bayonet and a bullet, but they did not hold back the third wave and retreated behind the Semyonovsky ravine. At that moment, General Dokhtcherov appeared. With a sword in his hand, the general stopped the fleeing soldiers. "Moscow is behind us. Everyone die, not a step back." And the fight continued. Attack of the Corps of Eugene Buhanais on Russian positions near the village of Borodino. In the central sector, the Corps of Eugene Buhanais attacked the battery set up by General Raevsky at 9:30 in the morning, was repulsed and repeated the attack at 11 o'clock. Volleys of French artillery hit the barrow, 300 guns fired, and then the infantry moved in dense columns. The French General Bonamy walked ahead, brandishing his sword. Grenades burst in the air and on the ground. Because of the rumble of guns, the whistle of bullets was not heard. Only one or two soldiers suddenly froze and fell prone to the ground. A volley of rifles slightly delayed the attackers. Cartridges, screams were heard from everywhere. There were no patrons. Napoleon on the Borodino Heights. Artist V. Vereshchagin. 1897. Napoleon's Army Uniform. Uniform of Napoleon's Army, Private of the 7th Hussars. Grenadier of Mecklenburg-Schwerin. Private of the 1st Cavalry Chasseur Regiment. Napoleon threw 35,000 soldiers into the attack on this extremely important height for him. The French have already ascended the mound. Our gunners fought with banners, cleavers, hands, whatever. The corpses of French soldiers filled up the ditch, and others broke into the battery along them. In hand-to-hand combat, almost all the defenders of the battery were exterminated. The enemy knew a lot that day. What does the Russian fight remote mean? Our hand-to-hand combat, the earth shook like our breasts. Mixed in a bunch of horses, people. And the volleys of 1,000 guns. Merged into a long howl. M.U. Lermontov. Borodino. General Raevsky gave the order to return the battery that dominated the entire Borodino field. With a bayonet attack led by General Yermolov, the height and 18 guns were returned. The counterattack of the Russian soldiers was so swift that the French fled. The French General Bonamy was taken prisoner. But our losses were great. Not only soldiers died, General Kutaisov died in this battle. He was 27 years old. In total, the Corps of General Raevsky lost so much that it ceased to exist. Further, Kurgan Height, or Raevsky's battery, was defended by other units, but by 16 o'clock they retreated. Napoleon was constantly informed from various points that the losses of the Russians were much greater than those of the French, that the Russians did not surrender, but were dying to the last. He was asked for reinforcements, asked to give a guard, but he replied that he could not risk his guard thousands of kilometers from France. Gloomy and silent, he stopped answering questions. M. Kutuzov at the command post on the day of the Battle of Borodino. Artist A. Shepelyak. 1951. By the end of the battle, by 6 p.m., the French troops had occupied the main Russian positions. Attempts by the French cavalry to develop success were repulsed by the cavalrymen of General Platov. About 300 guns advanced by the French began to fire on the retreating Russian troops slowly and in perfect order. Napoleon looked through a telescope and was surprised to see that the Russian soldiers were falling, but there was no flight. He gave the order to increase the fire. They want more, give them more. The Russian army regrouped and took up positions along the old Smolensk road. With the onset of darkness, Napoleon ordered the troops to be withdrawn to their original positions, leaving the previously taken Russian fortifications. Here it is dark. We're all ready. In the morning start a new fight. And stand until the end. Hear the drums crackle. And the basements retreated. Then we began to count the wounds. Count, comrades. M.U. Lermontov. Borodino. Who won the Battle of Borodino? Both in France and in Russia, the Battle of Borodino is still celebrated as a victory. Both sides have good reason. It was the bloodiest battle of that time. The French army lost about 58,000 people, according to French data, a total of 28,000 people, including 47 generals. The Russian army, 44,000 people, according to French data, 47,000 people, including 23 generals. Napoleon's troops were able to solve the tasks assigned to them, but they did not achieve their main goal. Borodino did not become a second Austerlitz. The Russian army was neither defeated nor put to flight. In the Battle of Borodino, she showed examples of stamina and tactical art. The Russian regiments moved back from their positions, but stood at the end of the battle as indestructible as at the beginning. But the morale of the Napoleonic army turned out to be broken, faith in the military genius of Napoleon disappeared. The combined Grenadier Division is on the attack. Artist F. Rubord. 1912. In a report to the Tsar, Kutuzov does not mention the word victory. He writes that the enemy has not won a single step of land anywhere with superior forces. But both in St. Petersburg and in Moscow, the Battle of Borodino was perceived as a Russian victory. Residents took to the streets, hugging and kissing. Alexander I awarded Kutuzov the military rank of Field Marshal and granted 100,000 rubles, and ordered all the soldiers who participated in the Battle of Borodino to be given 5 rubles each. A few years later, in exile, Napoleon recalled, "Of all my battles, the most terrible is the one I fought near Moscow." The French in it showed themselves worthy of victory, and the Russians acquired the right to be invincible. Tuchkovi. The Tuchkov brothers, Nikolai and Alexander, from the glorious galaxy of Russian military leaders of that era, took part in the Battle of Borodino. There were 5 brothers in all. All of them continued the hereditary work of their noble ancestors. They served the fatherland, for were generals. 47-year-old Nikolai by 1812 managed to fight in the Swedish and French campaigns, commanded a division. He was known for conscientious fulfillment of his duty, disinterestedness, straightforwardness. He possessed considerable talents as a military leader. He met the invasion as commander of the 3rd Infantry Corps, in one of the divisions of which his younger brother Alexander entered. N.A. Tuchkov, 1765–1812. Artist D. Dow. 1820s. A. Tuchkov, 1778–1812. Unknown painter. First Thursday 19th century. Alexander Tuchkov was born in 1778. Like his older brothers, he was enrolled in the army, served in the artillery. During a trip to France he visited academies and universities because he strove for knowledge. At the age of 22, he became a colonel, but this did not humble him. His ambition was directed to the common good, and not to personal success. At the age of 28, he married Margarita Narishkina, and soon his son Nikolai was born. And now the brilliant general, before whom a dizzying career opened up, suddenly asks Emperor Alexander to resign. He wanted to settle with his family in his beloved estate in the Tula province, to take care of the household and raise his son. The sovereign rejected the petition, and Alexander Tuchkov met the War of 1812 as a brigade commander. P.A. Tuchkov, 1775–1858. Artist D. Dow. 1820s. The feat of General A. Tuchkov on the Borodino field. Artist V. Burkut. 1981. Sergei also pursued a military career. At the age of 24 he took part in the war with Poland. In 1802 he was appointed civil governor of Georgia. In 1808–1812 he took part in the war with Turkey, already in the rank of lieutenant general. Pavel was born in 1775. For participation in the Swedish campaign in 1808–1809 he was awarded the Order of St. Anna First Degree. In the War of 1812, he commanded a unit in the army of Barclay de Tolly and, covering the withdrawal of the First Army across the Dnieper, was seriously wounded and captured. The eldest of the brothers Alexei, marshal of the nobility of the Svenigorod district of the Moscow province, in the summer of 1812 participated in the preparation of the Moscow militia. Near Borodino, General Nikolai Alexeyevich Tuchkov deployed his corps near the village of Utitsa, covering the old Smolensk road. The pressure of the French was great. By order of Bagration, Tuchkov singled out Konovnitsyn's division from his corps. Although he had the right not to comply with the order, his direct superior was Barclay de Tolly. This weakened the body, and the enemy increased the pressure. During the repulse of an attack on a height near the village of Utitsa, General Tuchkov was in front of the regiment. The height was defended, but the corps commander was killed, Abbess Maria Tuchkova. To help Bagration, Nikolai sent a division in which his brother Alexander served. She was thrown to take the Semyonov flushes from the French. A hail of buckshot fell upon the Russian troops. One after another, blooded soldiers and officers fell to the ground. The Russians wavered and stopped. General Tuchkov raised the abandoned banner and rushed at the enemy. Others ran after him. In this attack, buckshot hit the 34-year-old general. Upon learning of the death of her husband, Margarita Tuchkova fell ill. But in the second half of October she went to the Borodino field, and there, among the thousands of corpses that had already begun to be burned, she was looking for her husband's body. There was stinking smoke over the field, and a woman in black and a monk from the Lusatian monastery wandered among the piles of bodies. She did not find a husband. And soon she lost her only son. With the blessing of Metropolitan Filaret Drozdov of Moscow, the widow takes monastic vows with the name Maria and becomes abbess of the Saviour Borodino monastery founded by her on the battlefield. Yes, there were people in our time. Not like the current tribe. Bogatas are not you, they got a bad share. Few returned from the field. M.U. Lermontov. Borodino. Why did Kutuzov leave Moscow? The army and the people expected that after the Battle of Borodino, Kutuzov would give a second battle to defend the ancient Russian capital. But on the night of August 27, Kutuzov was informed that the Russian army had lost more than a third of its composition. What will be left of her after the new battle? New units and weapons are not being received, there is not enough food in the troops. On September 1, the military council was convened in the village of Fili near Moscow. Most of the generals, D.S. Doktorov, A.P. Ermolov, P.P. Konovnitsyn, L.L. Bennigsen, P.S. Kaisarov, and F.P. Uvarov, spoke in favor of a new battle. For leaving Moscow without a fight, N.N. Raevsky, A.I. Osterman Tolstoy, K.F. Toll and M.B. Barclay de Tolly, who said, the main goal is not to protect Moscow, but the entire fatherland. The position is unfavorable, and the army will be in undeniable danger of being defeated. Kutuzov knew what his decision would be, but it was difficult to talk about leaving Moscow without a fight, and this was the only right decision. Participants of the military council in Filiak, M.I. Kutuzov, P.P. Konovnitsyn, N.N. Raevsky, A.I. Osterman Tolstoy, M.B. Barclay de Tolly, F.P. Uvarov, D.S. Doktorov, A.P. Yermolov, K.F. Toll, L.L. Bennigsen, P.S. Kaisarov. M.I. Kutuzov. P.P. Konovnitsyn. N.N. Raevsky. A.I. Osterman Tolstoy. M.B. Barclay de Tolly. F.P. Uvarov. D.S. Doktorov. A.P. Ermolov. K.F. Toll. L.L. Bennigsen. P.S. Kaisarov. Military Council in Fili. Artist A. Kivchenko. 1880. With the loss of Moscow, Russia has not yet been lost, said the Field Marshal. I make it my first duty to preserve the army. As long as the army will exist, until then we will keep the hope of successfully ending the war. I know that responsibility will fall on me, but I sacrifice myself to save the fatherland. I order you to retreat. On the night of September 2, the Russian regiments, stretched wagon trains with the wounded, the surviving artillery moved through the huge city to the east. General Miloradovich managed to get Murat's promise to let the Russian troops pass through the city calmly. Meanwhile, the inhabitants of the capital remained in complete ignorance. Already after Borodin, an announcement appeared in Moskovsky Vedomosti about the performance on August 30 at the Bolshoi Theatre of the play Natalia, the Boyar's Daughter, a drama in 4 acts. After the performance, a masquerade will be given at the same theatre. The Moscow commander-in-chief, Count F.V. Rostopchin, in posters pasted around the city, assured that there was nothing to be afraid of, that the French would not be allowed to Moscow. However, the city gradually became empty. The stalls stopped trading. On the morning of September 1, the streets were filled with carriages, droshkis, and carts loaded to the top, traveling eastward. Nobles, Philistines, merchants, artisans, all left. Muscovites, like the inhabitants of Vilna, Vitebsk, Smolensk, did not want to live under Napoleon. On September 7, Alexander I received a report from Kutuzov about leaving Moscow without a fight and was so amazed that he turned grey in one night. For the first time in his life, he took the gospel in his hands, trying to understand from the Holy Scriptures why God punished him and his empire in such a way. In a letter to the Swedish Prince Bernadotte, who became an opponent of Napoleon from allies, Alexander Pavlovich wrote, "What I was afraid of happened." Kutuzov failed to take advantage of the excellent victory of the 26th of August. The enemy, who suffered terrible losses, ceased fire at 6 o'clock in the afternoon and retreated a few miles, leaving us the battlefield. Kutuzov did not have the courage to attack him in turn. The Russian army and residents leave Moscow in 1812. Artists A. Sokolov, A. Semyonov. 1958. And dozens of carts have already taken the treasures of the armory and documents from the state archives from Moscow. The abbots of many Moscow churches and monasteries also collected the main valuables and took them to Nizhny Novgorod and Vologda. Metropolitan Platon, who was in the Trinity Sergius Lavra, was decided, just in case, to be transported from Bethany to the Markrishensky monastery, although he assured that the enemy would not reach the Lavra. With his blessing, a religious procession was made around Sergiev Posad on September 1st with a confluence of many people. On that day, noble carriages and peasant carts were dragging and pulling from Moscow. The mansions of the nobility were empty, left with rich furnishings, collections of paintings and large libraries. Merchants took out their goods, whoever could, because there was not enough supply. Poor tradesmen, artisans, and the urban poor abandoned their miserable belongings and left the enemy with a bundle. Of the 280,000, barely 6,000 remained. The great city was deserted. Form of the Russian army. Chief officer of the Sapper Regiment. Non-commissioned officer of the Jaeger regiments. Chief officer and non-commissioned officer of the Grenadier regiments. Hard win. The fire of Moscow in September 1812. View to the right of the Kremlin. Artist I. Ghibali. 1816. How did the French behave in Moscow? The first to enter Moscow on the evening of September 2nd were the advanced units of Murat's corps, who flaunted in front of his riders in an embroidered golden uniform of purple velvet, white trousers, yellow boots and a hat with a huge white plume. On September 2nd, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the headquarters of the emperor reached the great city, which then surpassed Paris in size. There were shouts, "Moscow! Hooray! Long live Napoleon, long live the emperor!" In unison, the French sang the Marseillaise. Napoleon admired the panorama of the huge city from the Sparrow Hills for a long time. Under the rays of the autumn sun, among the greenery of the gardens, the domes of hundreds of churches sparkled. "So, finally, this famous city!" he exclaimed. "Now the war is over." Having crossed the river on a white Arabian horse, he stopped at Poklenaya Gora in anticipation of a delegation of boyars who were supposed to bring him the keys to the city, as they had earlier, from Brussels, Berlin, Vienna, and other European cities. The fugitive king of Prussia even sent a letter asking if everything was comfortable for him in the royal palace. The emperor received congratulations from his officers. He was given a letter from the Austrian foreign minister Metternich, who wrote, "Russia is no more. Napoleon and his army on Poklenaya Hill in front of Moscow, waiting for the deputation of the boyars with the keys to the city." Artist V. Vereshchagin. 1891 to 1892. However, the boyars still did not go. Murat was sent behind them with cavalrymen, but in vain. "These rascals hid, but we will find them," Napoleon exclaimed angrily. "They will crawl to us on their knees." Did he understand that the old Russian capital did not surrender to him? It became clear to him the very next day. The conqueror went to the Kremlin and settled in the Grand Palace. The weather was so good that the few Muscovites were surprised. Napoleon rode on horseback and repeated with pleasure, "Autumn is better and even warmer in Moscow than in Fontainebleau, a suburb of Paris." He continued to lead his empire and all of Europe, receiving hundreds of dispatches and sending out dozens of letters and decrees on a variety of issues. His soldiers scattered around the city, hungry, many ragged and barefoot. Having reached Moscow, they set off to hunt for themselves, who needs what. Marauders roamed the city and took chickens from the remaining residents, took away horses and cows, entered empty houses and took what they wanted. The Moscow authorities and the merchants did not have time to take everything out. There were arsenals with weapons, food stores, mountains of sugar, flour, thousands of liters of vodka and wine, warehouses with cloth, linen, and fur products. The women ran away in such a hurry that they left the diamonds on the dressing table. In many houses, the wall clock ticked measuredly. Everything became the prey of the invaders. Military quartermaster Henri Bale, who later became the famous writer Stendhal, wrote on October 4 from Moscow, "I went with Louis to look at the fire. We saw how a certain Sauveur, a horse artilleryman, drunk, beats a guards officer with his saber and scolds him for no reason at all. One of his robbery comrades went deep into the burning street, where he probably roasted. Little Mr. J came to rob a little with us, began to offer us everything that we took without him as a gift. My servant was completely drunk. He dumped tablecloths, wine, a violin, which he took for himself, and all sorts of other things into the carriage. Looters." Someone told them that the large cross on the Ivan the Great Kremlin bell tower was made of pure gold. They broke out the cross and threw it on the ground. Only later, during the retreat, the Cossacks found it in the French convoy. In the Kremlin Assumption Cathedral, a huge silver chandelier was removed, and scales were hung in its place to weigh the stolen in churches. The French desecrated Orthodox shrines. They entered churches, stripped gold and silver frames from icons, stole a total of 320 poods of silver and about 20 poods of gold. All this was later recaptured from them by the Cossacks. 127 churches were plundered and destroyed. They turned church thrones into dining tables. Sacred clothes were used as blankets for horses. Marshal Devout slept in the altar of the Puy de Voix monastery, and in the Archangel Cathedral a dead horse lay in the altar. The blasphemy of the European barbarians was amazing. They chopped icons for firewood, they threw the holy relics of Saint Alexis and Saint Philip on the floor. Many churches were turned into stables. They cursed everything sacred in every possible way, forgetting that the Lord cannot be mocked. Moscow fire. The fire started already on September 3 in the city center. The servant woke Napoleon up. He went to the window and was stunned. The Kremlin was surrounded by a fiery sea. Moscow was on fire. The fire raged on Red Square on the Arbut in Zamoskvoreky. On the night of September 4, a strong wind arose that lasted more than a day. It turned local fires into a general firestorm. Adjutants managed to get their emperor out of the Kremlin, but it became dangerous to stay in the city. Napoleon took refuge in the suburban Petrovsky Palace, but from there one could see the fiery glow that stood over the city. The glow of the Moscow fire was observed within a radius of 100 kilometers from Moscow. By September 6, the wind died down. It began to rain, gradually stopping the fires. What kind of people? What barbarians? Napoleon exclaimed. In order to cause me temporary harm, they destroy the creation of the ages. Later, there were many disputes whether Moscow was set on fire by order of its governor, Count Rostopchin, or it happened by accident, or maybe the reason was the hatred of Muscovites for the invaders or, on the contrary, the contempt of the French for a foreign capital. It is likely that all these reasons are valid. Moscow was basically a wooden city. Left unattended, in dry and windy weather, she turned out to be the prey of a powerful fiery element, and it turned out to be impossible to save her. The areas of Arbut and Zamoskvoreky, the huge buildings of Gostiny Dvor and the university, more than 200 churches and much, much more were burned down. The damage caused by the fire was estimated at the prices of that time at 300 million rubles. On September 7, Napoleon wrote to Alexander I, "The beautiful, magnificent city of Moscow no longer exists." Rostopchin burned it. 400 arsonists were caught at the scene of the crime. They all said that they set fire to the houses on the orders of the governor and the chief of police. On the same day, he wrote to his wife, Empress Marie-Louise, "I had no idea about this city. It had 500 palaces, as beautiful as the Élysée, furnished with French furniture with incredible luxury, many royal palaces, barracks, magnificent hospitals. Everything has disappeared. For 4 days the fire has been devouring the city. Since all the small houses of the townspeople are made of wood, they flare up like matches. It is the governor and the Russians, enraged that they are defeated, set fire to this beautiful city. These bastards were even so prudent that they took away or damaged fire pumps." Moscow fire in September 1812. It appears that there were several causes for the fire. This is the lack of supervision of wooden buildings and the atrocities of the French marauders, and the main thing is the order of the Russian authorities. Kutuzov, when leaving Moscow, ordered to burn all warehouses and stores with supplies and weapons, as well as to take out all fire-extinguishing shells. On the morning of September 2nd, Rostopchin ordered the police bailiff P. Voronenko to try to destroy everything with fire, and the bailiff with the people entrusted to him carried out this order, in different places, as far as possible, until 10 o'clock in the evening. Subsequently, it was discovered that a large part of the owners themselves set fire to their houses. Muscovites reasoned, "Disappear all my property, burn down my house, but don't stay cursed dogs, be a draw, which I can't take, just don't fall into the hands of these damned Frenchmen." According to Russian historians, more than 6,000 out of 9,000 buildings perished in the fire, including the most valuable monuments of history and culture. Napoleon waited in vain. Intoxicated with last happiness. Moscow kneeling. With the keys of the old Kremlin. No, my Moscow did not go to him with a guilty head. Not a holiday, not an accepting gift. She was preparing a fire. An impatient hero. A.S. Pushkin. Eugene Onegin. Having captured Moscow, Napoleon saw himself as the master of the situation and sent a message to Alexander I with a proposal for peace. The fire changed everything. What he promised his soldiers, abundance and good winter quarters, turned into ashes. He thought that entering Moscow would be the highest point of his greatness, and this was the beginning of his end. Napoleon in Moscow. 1812. From deserted and dying Moscow, he wrote to Paris, Minister of Foreign Affairs Mayor, "We are pursuing the enemy, who is retreating to the limits of the Volga. We found great riches in Moscow, a city of exceptional beauty. For 200 years, Russia will not recover from the losses it has suffered." He ordered to inform the whole world about the victory, but he could not deceive himself. Later, on the island of St. Helena, Napoleon burst out with a confession, "I should have died immediately after entering Moscow." Apparently, then he finally realized that he was not in control of the course of this war, that he was not able to direct its course, which turned out to be stronger than his will, talents and pride. Why did Napoleon fail to make peace? Already on September 5, Napoleon summoned General I.V. Tutelman, who remained in Moscow, the head of the Moscow orphanage, where hundreds of orphans lived, and asked, "Write to Emperor Alexander, whom I still respect, that I want peace." The letter was sent with one official, but there was no answer. Napoleon summoned the Moscow nobleman Ivan Alexeyevich Yakovlev, father of Ai Hassen, and gave him the same instruction, providing him with a pass through the French posts. Yakovlev reached St. Petersburg, handed over the letter to the Winter Palace, but Napoleon received no answer. Then Napoleon sends Marquis Lauriston, who was ambassador to Russia before the war, to the camp of Kutuzov with a third peace proposal. Kutuzov informed the Tsar of the Emperor's intention, but Alexander I answered him that he was refusing to negotiate peace and reprimanded the field marshal for meeting with Lauriston. Meanwhile, in the immediate environment, the Tsar was under strong pressure in favor of the immediate conclusion of peace on any terms. To this he was pushed by his brother, Grand Duke Konstantin Pavlovich, and his mother, Dowager Empress Maria Fedorovna, trusted dignitaries, A. Arakcheev, N.P. Rumyantsev, A.D. Balashov. Brother Constantine begged for peace in order to avoid civil war and the death of the dynasty. Panic gripped the royal court. His wife, Empress Elizaveta Alexeyevna, and his sister, Grand Duchess Ekaterina Pavlovna, strengthened the Tsar's intention to fight to victory. Napoleon instructs Marshal Lauriston to achieve peace with Kutuzov at all costs. Artist V. Vereshchagin. 1899–1900. In a letter to his sister, the Tsar wrote, "I am far from losing heart under the yoke of blows raining down on me. On the contrary, more than ever, I am determined to persevere in the struggle, and to this goal all my concerns are directed." He wrote to Prince Bernadotte, "Once forced to start this war, I firmly decided to continue it for years, even if I had to fight on the banks of the Volga." The army was strongly in favor of continuing the war. When one of the Tsar's adjutants expressed fear in early September that he would not agree to conclude peace with Napoleon now, Alexander I exclaimed, "I will grow my beard so far, and I will eat potatoes with the last of my peasants in the depths of Siberia sooner than I will sign the shame of my fatherland." The reproaches of Grand Duchess Ekaterina Pavlovna turned out to be all the more painful for him. Moscow is taken. "This is inexplicable," the emperor's sister wrote on September 3rd. "Do not forget your decision, no peace, and then you still have hope to restore your honor." In a letter written 3 days later, the tone is sharper. "The capture of Moscow caused extreme irritation of the minds, discontent has reached the highest degree, and your person is far from being spared. You are loudly accused of the misfortunes of your empire, of ruin, general and private, and finally, of the loss of the honor of the country and your own honor. In a response letter, Alexander Pavlovich justified himself and explained the circumstances that turned out to be stronger than their will, and his actions. I inspire no confidence in the troops that the failures imputed to me are more unpleasant than those imputed to my generals. Judge for yourself, my good friend, how painful it was for me to hear after that my honor was hurt when I only did what was wanted of me. I am far from falling into despair. Despite all the bitterness that pervades me, I firmly decided more than ever to be persistent in the fight, and all my thoughts are striving for that goal. Artillery preparations during the Patriotic War of 1812. It should be especially noted that Napoleon, in the course of his struggle against Russia, not only acted openly on the battlefield. In the convoys of the Great Army, fake Russian banknotes specially printed in Paris were brought. In Moscow, he gave the order to find papers on the Pugachev case, perhaps hoping to raise a peasant rebellion, or maybe Tartars and Bashkirs against the Russians. With close people, he discussed plans for the division of Russia into specific principalities, planning in Moscow to put one of the Dolgorukhy on the throne. In these secret plans, a significant place was occupied by the desire to split the royal family in order to remove the stubborn Alexander. In St. Petersburg, a certain Shaborkin was put on trial, spreading the rumor that Napoleon was the son of Catherine II and was going to take away his rightful crown from Alexander, after which he would free the peasants. Alexander Pavlovich knew that secret Napoleonic agents were making every effort to inflate discontent in the country against the government and him personally, that the coup operation was timed to coincide with the fall of one of the capitals. They also talked about the enthronement of his sister under the name of Catherine III. That is why Alexander I ended his letter to her frankly and meaningfully. Would you be surprised if I told you that I was notified that the operation would begin with you and that every effort would be made to present me in the most unattractive light in your eyes? The Grand Duchess hastened to assure her august brother that he should not have any concern on her account. You can check my behavior and all my relations, they won't prove anything that would be to my detriment. This is how acute the crisis reached within the royal family after leaving Moscow on issues of war and peace. Drum, pistols and shower of the Russian army during the Patriotic War of 1812. Napoleon, confident that Alexander Pavlovich would agree to his messages, patiently waited for an answer in Moscow. He repeated, "The Moscow peace will put an end to my military expeditions. Europe will become one people. Each person, traveling everywhere, will always be in his homeland. Leaving Moscow without signing the preliminary peace terms is tantamount to a political defeat." Camp in Tarantino. Artists A. Sokolov, A. Semyonov. 1958. If the Tsar had agreed to peace with Napoleon, who occupied Moscow, then the 1812 campaign of the year would have been a triumph for the French conqueror. Napoleon understood this well, that's why he stayed in Moscow for so long, 36 days. He hoped for an answer from the Winter Palace. What was Kutuzov's plan? The Russian commander-in-chief, just for show, gave the order to move along the Ryazan road. Immediately after leaving Moscow, the army secretly turned onto the Kaluga road and on September 21 camped near the village of Tarantino, 80 kilometers from Moscow. Napoleon was deceived by the reports of his scouts, who assured him that the Russians were leaving through Kolomna to Ryazan, and only a few squadrons were sent there. The famous Tarantino March allowed Kutuzov to achieve several goals, to cover the cities of Tula and Kaluga, from where weapons and food were supplied to the Russian army and from where the path to the rich southern provinces was opened, and to threaten the main road of the French army Moscow-Smolensk. The Taratinsky camp became the base for the preparation of the Russian counter-offensive. Combat units from other parts of Russia and detachments of militias came here. Within 2 weeks, Kutuzov had 240,000 soldiers and militias, and Napoleon had 116,000 people left. Kutuzov was sure that the French themselves would leave the cold and hungry Moscow, and did not want to waste soldiers' lives to achieve this goal. But when the weakened French army moves back, then it will be possible to strike at it, as was envisaged by the strategic plan of Barclay de Tolly. Who are the partisans? The very word, partisan, is French. So called the Spanish fighters against Napoleonic rule. In August, even before the Battle of Borodino, Lieutenant Colonel Denis Davidov sent a report to his boss, Prince Bagration, with a proposal to put at his disposal 1,000 Cossacks for partisan operations in the rear of the French army. Bagration approved the proposal. True, instead of 1,000, Davidov was given a little more than 100 Hussars and Cossacks, but the trouble was the beginning. A small detachment moved behind enemy lines. Davidov hoped for the help of the peasants, but at first he did not receive it. In the villages, they did not distinguish between French and Russian military uniforms. Seeing an officer in a hussar uniform, the men either rushed at him with pitchforks or fled into the forest. Then he changed his uniform to a peasant Armenian, removed the Order of Saint Anna, and put on a small icon with the icon of Saint Nicholas the Wonderworker around his neck, let go of his beard. Now there is mutual understanding. The peasants helped the partisans with food and told them all the news about the movements of the French units. They became the guides of the partisans. In the very first battles, the detachment achieved success. It defeated several detachments of the French, repulsed the convoys with ammunition. The command sent a detachment of Bashkir horsemen to strengthen. Now Davidov could decide on major operations. In mid-September, the detachment attacked transport near Vyazma. Success exceeded all my expectations, he reported to the Russian command. 276 French soldiers and officers were taken prisoner, 20 provisions and 12 artillery carts were captured. D.V. Davidov, 1784–1839. Artiste, Orlovsky. 1814. The French governor of Vyazma gave the order to exterminate the partisans. A detachment of 2,000 was sent. Davidov was ordered to be delivered alive or dead. But Davidov's detachment was elusive for the enemy. Having struck, he immediately broke up into small groups that gathered in a pre-arranged place. The detachments of I.S. Dorokov, A.S. Figner, A.N. Zaslavin, the peasant detachments of Gerasim Kurin, Yermolai Chetvertikov and other commanders acted in the same way. The partisans burned the enemy's warehouses, obtained important information about the movements of the French units, intercepted couriers, freed Russian prisoners, and destroyed small garrisons. Peasant weapons. The attack of the partisans of the detachment of General I.S. Dorokov on the French convoy in the Perkushkov area. Artiste, Safonov. Early 20th century. Napoleon was forced to send large units to guard the roads. Through the Marquis of Lauriston, he conveyed to Kutuzov his displeasure that the war is not being waged according to the rules. The peasants revere this war as well as the invasion of the Tatars, answered Kutuzov, and I am not able to change their upbringing. The capture of the French convoy in the Moshaïsk district in 1812. Artiste, Gorokov. 1974. In March 1813, Count F. V. Rostopchin published in the St. Petersburg newspaper Sevenaya Pchela several reports on the activities of partisan detachments against the Napoleonic army in the Moscow province, in the Bogorodsk district. The village of Ganusov, the peasant Pavel Prokhorov, seeing 5 French people riding towards him, set off on horseback in a Cossack dress and, not having a firearm with him, took them prisoner with only 1 lance and delivered them to the Cossacks for sending on command. In the villages of Vilin, Krivtsy and Sofian, the peasants, arming themselves against the French, who arrived in sufficient numbers to rob the holy churches and to seduce those living in these places, not only did not allow them to do so, but, having overcome, exterminated them. In this case, from the shots from the enemy in the village of Sofino, 62 yards with all the buildings and property were burned. Zvenigorod district. When almost all of this county was already occupied by the enemy, the city and surrounding residents, uniting, agreed to unanimously defend the city of Voskresensk. They armed themselves with everything they could, established guards and agreed among themselves that, at the ringing of bells from her, they would immediately gather there on horseback and on foot. They often fought near the city itself and far from Onago, sometimes alone, sometimes with Cossacks, killed many, took and delivered to the Cossack teams, so that in one Zvenigorod district and some inhabitants more than 2,000 people were exterminated by enemies. Thus, the city of Voskresensk, some villages and the monastery, called New Jerusalem, were saved from invasion and ruin. Were there traitors among the Russians? On September 14, peasants told Denis Davidov that Yefim Nikiforov and Sergei Martinov from the village of Gorodish-led French marauders on wealthy villagers, took part in the murder of the landowner Veshnev and plundered the church. Davidov sent Cossacks to capture the traitors, but Nikiforov fled, and only Martinov was captured. This booty was more important to me than 200 Frenchmen. The partisan commander recalled later. I immediately reported this to the head of the militia and prepared an exemplary punishment. On September 21, the order came to shoot the criminal. They confessed Martinov, put a white shirt on him, and led him to the very church he had robbed. People gathered from all the nearby villages, silently watching the execution. The form of the Russian militia. Chief officer, sergeant and Cossack of foot horseshoes of the Tula militia. Sergeant of the foot squads of the St. Petersburg militia. N.A. Durova, 1783 to 1866. And in Moscow, on the day Napoleon joined it, one Moscow lady Zagryevskaya with several friends met the French emperor on Volkonka and brought him the keys on a velvet pillow. The keys were to her barn, but she said they were the keys to the Kremlin. Napoleon was offended to see several cutesy ladies instead of the Moscow boyars, but, as a well-mannered person, he thanked and ordered to give her the village of Kuzminki with the country house of Prince S. M. Golitsyn. Already after the liberation of Moscow, Zagryevskaya did not even blow a mustache. She continued to live in Kuzminki. Golitsyn returned and sent to inspect his estate. The servants are answered, "The new landowner Zagryevskaya lives here." Golitsyn was surprised and ordered to drive the self-proclaimed hostess in the neck. Zagryevskaya importantly replied to the messengers, "I don't know Golitsyn. My Kuzminki, Emperor Napoleon himself gave them to me." Sergei Mikhailovich Golitsyn sent for the police. This was the only way they were able to get the dispersed lady out of the estate. Cavalier Virgin. The first woman in the Russian army, Nadezhda Durova, entered its ranks under the name of Alexander Alexandrov even before the War of 1812. At that time, military affairs were considered an exclusively male field. Even female nurses appeared in the army half a century later. Nadezhda Durova was born into the family of a hussar captain, was left an orphan at an early age and was brought up by her father's hussar orderly. Bold and resolute, agile and courageous, she rode well, knew how to shoot and wielded a saber. The stories of her father and her tutor Batman about the glorious victories of Russian weapons during the time of Suvorov ignited her imagination. She loved to dance and sing, dressed up in beautiful dresses with pleasure, played with dolls, but she was bored. It was boring to play the harpsichord, read French novels and dream of marriage. Nevertheless, in 1801, at the age of 18, she was married to a small estate nobleman, but she soon returned to her parents. The army was her only calling. But what to do, she is a woman. And then, at the age of 23, Nadezhda changes into men's clothes, under the name of Alexander Sokolov, enters the Horse Polish Lancers Regiment as a private and participates in several campaigns. In December 1807, after her father's request to search for her daughter and return her home, Durov was summoned to St. Petersburg to meet with the emperor. She received permission to continue military service and was promoted to officer by Alexander I for her bravery. Under the name of Alexander Alexandrov, she was enrolled in the Mariupol Hussar Regiment. During the War of 1812 she served in the Lithuanian Lancers Regiment. At that time, she was promoted to lieutenant with the duties of an orderly at Field Marshal Kutuzov. The service was from early morning until late at night. Generals Yermolov and Konovnitsyn appreciated Lieutenant Alexandrov and tried to give him important instructions. Durova took orders, learned about the movements of Russian units, about routes and crossings, about the advanced positions of the enemy. Rushing all day through the fields from one regiment to another, I was exhausted, she later recalled, tired and was not at all happy with the glory of a serviceable orderly. In early October, Kutuzov noticed that she was limping and asked why. "Contusion. Contusion from the corps," exclaimed the field marshal. "And you are not treated. Now go to the doctor." The doctor insisted on long-term treatment, but Durova did not want to leave the army. "Go home," Kutuzov said. "We may be here for a long time." Title page of Notes by N.A. Durova. With tears in her eyes, the cavalry girl went for treatment. Why did Napoleon leave Moscow? Speaking with his most efficient orderly, the old field marshal was cunning. From day to day he was waiting for the movement of the French troops, but he took pity on the young Lieutenant Alexandrov. On October 7, the French emperor ordered his troops to leave Moscow. There is no answer to the offer of peace from the king, and it was in vain to wait for him. So the war continues. Sitting in a burnt-out capital waiting for winter without food and hay proved dangerous. Although parades of troops were held daily, and in the evenings, costume balls, performances of Comme des Franquets actors brought from Paris and concerts of Italian tenors, the morale of soldiers and officers was low. There was plenty of alcohol, but there was not enough bread and meat. The robberies continued. At all the gates to the Kremlin guards grenadiers stood on watch, dressed in women's fur coats, tied at the waist with cashmere shawls. The direction of the future movement was discussed at the military council, south or north. The marshals advised not to go to Petersburg, where there are many marshes, bad roads and winter comes early. The southern direction was seen as more profitable, to Kaluga, to Tula, beyond which the rich and warm southern provinces of Russia opened up. In the meantime, it was necessary to retreat to Smolensk, but not along the old, ruined to the ground, but along the new Kaluga road. Napoleon approved this decision. The expulsion from Moscow of the remnants of the Napoleonic army by a detachment of light cavalry under the command of General Ilovaiski on October 10, 1812. An endless line of various carriages and carts with provisions and property stolen from Moscow houses followed the army. Discipline was so weakened that the resolute Marshal Davout stopped shooting those who put valuables in army carts, although there were not enough horses even for artillery. Napoleon understood the danger of such a convoy for the fighting of his army, but it was already a different army, and he did not dare to give the order to burn everything captured by his soldiers. Before leaving Moscow, the French emperor ordered to blow up the Kremlin, to wipe it off the face of the earth. What for? Napoleon's famous phrase, "I never do useless things." That was the revenge of the unsubbed Russian capital. The French themselves then called this order the most barbaric of all Napoleon's orders, but carried it out. A large amount of explosives was placed under all the buildings in the Kremlin, under its palaces, cathedrals, and towers of the Kremlin wall. When the last French soldiers left the city center, the sappers set fire to the fuses and rushed out of the Kremlin. But Russian patriots remained there. Risking their lives, they, remaining nameless, put out the fuses. The rain that came suddenly helped them. However, there were explosions. The church of St. John of the Ladder, attached to the bell tower of Ivan the Great, and a crack ran along the bell tower itself. From the belfry, the Menipud bell Reut fell and cracked. The building of the arsenal, the Vodovzvodnaya tower, and two smaller towers in the Kremlin wall, coming from the Tainitsky gates, collapsed. The Kremlin palace and the palace of facets burned down. The Nikolsky gates also suffered from the explosion, but what a miracle is such a miracle, that part of the gate that had the image of Saint Nicholas survived, and even the glass on the icon remained intact. However, the French also encountered miracles. A detachment of Polish lancers was sent to Sergiev Posad to seize the treasures of the Trinity Sergius Lavra. But suddenly such a dense fog fell on the ground that it was not possible to see the road. The lancers tried to go plunder the next day, but again the fog blocked their path. Reverend Sava, Zvenigorod miracle worker. Icon. 19th century. Vision of Reverend Sava Storosevsky to Yevgeny Buhanais. And in the Savino-Storosevsky monastery near Moscow, where the troops of Napoleon's stepson, the Viceroy of Italy, Eugene Buhanais, were stationed, one night a grey-bearded old man in a black monastic robe appeared to him in a dream, saying, "Do not lead your army to plunder the monastery and especially take away anything from the church. If you fulfill my request, then God will have mercy on you, and you will return to your homeland safe and sound." One can imagine the horror of an atheist when in the morning in church he recognized in the icon over the shrine of Saint Sava the monk he had dreamed of. Eugene Buhanais ordered all churches to be locked up and the keys to be given to him, and the soldier warned that if anyone took something from the monastery, he would be shot immediately. Everything in the monastery remained intact. But the Viceroy of Italy was able to safely leave Russia and lived for a long time. The thinned great army moved to Kaluga. "Woe to those who stand in my way," Napoleon said. He hoped to covertly bypass Kutuzov or throw him back if he blocked his path. But neither succeeded. The glorious city of Maloyaroslavets. One of the army partisans, Alexander Nikitovich Seslavin, on October 10, during reconnaissance, discovered enemy movement along the new Kaluga road. He climbed a tree. There was a dense rumble over the road, which usually accompanied the movement of large masses of troops. The whole road, as far as one could see, was densely filled with enemy columns. It became clear that the French army had left Moscow and was trying to march south. It was possible to capture several prisoners, who were taken to Kutuzov. Hearing the news, the field marshal wept, "God, my creator! Finally, you heeded our prayer, and from this moment Russia is saved." Few people knew that the day before, on October 9, the 75-year-old Metropolitan Platon, in his Bethany monastery, suddenly half rose in his chair and exclaimed, "Go out, go out. Who got out? The attendant was surprised. Napoleon left Moscow, the old man said in a weak voice. He died a month later, and Muscovites assured that the Lord extended his days so that there would be a righteous man on earth, praying in a general calamity. A.N. says Lavin, 1780–1858. Important discovery of the partisan, says Lavin. Malyaroslavets, as its very name implies, is a small town 120 kilometers from Moscow. For Napoleon, its capture was of great importance as an important point for advancing in a southwestern direction. He no longer wanted a general battle. This Kutuzov will not receive a new battle from me, Napoleon said irritably to the adjutant on October 12. Bonaparte was annoyed that at dawn on October 6, the Russian units attacked the vanguard of Murat at Tarutino and overturned it. Murat was able to avoid complete defeat only because of inaccuracies in the transfer of orders from Russian generals and the disagreements that arose between them. Battles were to be avoided in order to preserve the last of their strength. The French emperor believed that Kutuzov was waiting for him on the old Kaluga road while the Great Army on October 10 switched to a new road. She had only 1 day's march to Kaluga, but A.N. Seslavin warned the Russian command in time about the direction of the enemy's movement. Upon receipt of this news, Kutuzov stopped the pursuit of Murat's corps and moved his troops to cut across the French, to Malyaroslavets. Ataman M.I. Platov. When Dokhturov's corps and Platov's Cossack regiments approached the city on October 12, it turned out that it was taken by the troops of Eugene Buhani's. Dokhturov, on his own initiative, ordered to block the road to Kaluga and began the struggle for the liberation of Malyaroslavets. 24,000 men fought on each side. The city changed hands 8 times. It is difficult to name another battle that went on with such bitterness. Both the French and the Russians understood that it was now that the fate of not so much this city as the whole war was being decided. Arriving at the height of the fighting, Napoleon was amazed that the Russians again figured out his maneuver and imposed an unnecessary battle on him. He threw into the fire of battle several divisions from Davout's corps and the most reliable parts of his old guard. The result was the same as under Borodino. The completely destroyed town was captured by the French, but they could not break through to Kaluga. Battle for Malyaroslavets, October 12, 1812. Artist Ed. Samakish. Early 20th century. In the early morning of October 13, Napoleon left to inspect the positions and almost got captured. According to the memoirs of Caulaincourt, it was barely beginning to dawn when we came face to face with the Cossacks, whose main detachment attacked the artillery park in front of us and captured several guns. It was still so dark that we understood what was happening only by the cries of the Cossacks and found ourselves interspersed with some of them. Only the Prince of Neuchatel and I were near the Emperor. All 3 of us held drawn swords in our hands. Only the on-duty squadrons that arrived in time overturned the Cossacks, and the guard again beat off their guns. If the Cossacks, Caulaincourt believed, had acted more decisively, then they would have captured us, the Emperor would have been killed or taken prisoner. The news of this incident made an unpleasant impression on the remnants of the Great Army, clearly showing what it now stands. On October 13, Napoleon refused to continue the battle and ordered a retreat from Malyaroslavets to the west along the old Kaluga road. This is how Napoleon's 20-year conquest of the world came to a halt near this small Russian town. Did the French retreat or flee? Let's say right away that the retreat of the former Great Army, which began on October 13, turned out to be a complete disaster for it. The road was a scorched desert, villages burned and abandoned by the inhabitants, cities plundered earlier by the French. Dead silence reigned there, not even a cat could be found. There was nothing to live on, and yet it was still an army. Kutuzov led his troops in parallel, shielding the central provinces from the French, attacking individual parts of the enemy. It is known that a mortally wounded beast is doubly dangerous. On October 22, the battle took place at Vyazma. Miloradovich and Platov, thinking of cutting off the French vanguard, ran into the main forces and, after a stubborn battle, overturned them. Vyazma was taken by storm, more than 1,000 prisoners, carts and 87 guns were captured. On the same day, Seslavin and Davidov captured Orgorov's brigade at Lyakov, by the road. Not far from Pleva, November 8. Liberation of Vyazma. On October 27, Marshal Berthier sent a report to Napoleon. It is my duty to inform your Majesty about the condition of the corps that I examined on the march. They are almost in complete disarray. A small part of the soldiers remains with the banners. Others go by themselves in different directions, trying to find food and get rid of the service. In recent days, many soldiers have abandoned their guns and cartridges. When the French units reached Smolensk, it was no longer the Great Army, but a crowd of feral people. Smolensk deceived their expectations. The food warehouses were devastated by the corps that had passed through the city earlier. What was left in the city was only enough for the old and young guards. The emperor, first of all, took care of the guard, in which he saw the only reliable force. Therefore, it retained combat readiness, but its ranks also began to melt. The defeat of Marshal Davout at Krasny. Artist D. Scotty. 1814. Winter came early that year, and the Russian frost helped Kutuzov. On November 1st, the remnants of the French army left Smolensk. There are only 50,000 of them left. And behind them walked unarmed crowds of people, about 30,000 people dressed in fur coats, wrapped in women's shawls. On their feet instead of smart boots, they had windings from carpets taken from noble houses. The spectacle the road presented was horrific. Caulaincourt recalled, numerous corpses of our evacuated wounded lay on the road. Most of them died from cold or hunger, or were abandoned by those who were entrusted with their transportation. Exhausted and not shod with spikes, the horses fell at every step. They remained lying, sprawled on the ground, and it was impossible to force them to try to rise again. Almost everyone walked, and the emperor 2 or 3 times a day left the carriage and, according to the general example, walked for some time, leaning on the shoulder of the adjutant. The burning of the banners of the Great Army by order of Napoleon after the battles near Krasno. Artist A. Cossack. 1912. In addition to the troops of Kutuzov, the corps of General P. X. Wittgenstein, who had previously covered the direction to Petersburg, was moving across the French army from the north. From the south was the Danube army of Admiral P. V. Chichagov. The position of the retreating became more and more dangerous. In 3-day battles on November 3rd to 6th near Krasno, the corps of Marshal Ney was almost destroyed. About 5,000 French were killed and wounded, 90,000 prisoners were taken, a huge convoy and 116 guns. For this battle, Field Marshal Kutuzov received the title of Prince of Smolensk, and Ataman Platov received the title of Count. The plight of the French army during the retreat from Moscow. Snowfalls have begun. The road was solid ice, even footmen could hardly stand on their feet. Every minute they had to throw carriages and trucks with looted property off the road in order to clear the way. Everything was messed up, no one cared about putting things in order. They hurried forward, away from terrible Russia. The famine took on unbelievable proportions. The French ate the insides of dead horses. Salt was not enough, and it was replaced with gunpowder. They were emaciated and overgrown with beards. Their eyes were inflamed from the smoke of fires. After spending the night in the snow, dozens of bodies remained motionless every morning. It was a retreat, much like an escape. The pursuit of the retreating French by the Cossacks. Artist A. Desario. 1827. Form of the Russian Army. Private and non-commissioned officer of the Life Guards Cossack Regiment. Later, having reached Paris, Napoleon created a legend that their main opponent was General Frost. However, at the same time, this legend was refuted by eyewitnesses, participants in the events. For example, Henri Bale, Stendhal, wrote, "It would be a mistake to think that winter came early in 1812, on the contrary, the weather in Moscow was most beautiful. When we performed from there on October 6, 19, it was only 3 degrees of frost, and the sun was shining brightly." It is known that when Napoleon decided to go to Paris, on December 5 he left the city of Smorgon on wheels, and only 2 days later there was so much snow that he had to transfer to a sleigh. Did Napoleon lose his talent as a commander? Of course not. This was shown by the passage of French troops across the Berezina River. Napoleon himself examined the banks of the river and ordered to check the fords. Because of the frost, the river became shallow, and the water reached the belly of the horse, so that the cavalrymen could cross themselves. For the passage of infantry, artillery and convoys, the emperor ordered the construction of bridges in the Borisov region. In order to hide the true place of the crossing from Kutuzov, bridges were built in several places, and the Russian troops succumbed to deception. Admiral Chichagov decided that the enemy should be expected to the south, and sent his troops there. Armand de Caulaincourt recalled that Napoleon spent the whole day at the bridge construction site. He encouraged the sappers, who worked with great enthusiasm, often climbed into the icy water. Napoleon examined the opposite bank, outlining escape routes, and also ordered the placement of artillery batteries to shell the Russian avant-garde. On November 14, an organized crossing began, but skirmishes soon followed. The confused crowd passionately desired to immediately cross to the other side. Commanders ceased to obey. The infantrymen brandished the butts of their rifles, the riders brandished their sabers. Everyone wanted to break through, get ahead of each other. Luggage wagons, cannons, carriages, wagons hopelessly crowded each other and blocked the road. Axles and wheels broke, then the wagons were thrown into the water. Shouts and curses were heard from everywhere in all languages of Europe, and at this time, the Russian artillery arrived in time and began shelling the crossing. Kutuzov's plan was to surround the French and destroy them, to prevent them from crossing the Berezina. But the delay of his troops, who also suffered from hunger and cold, the inaccurate execution of orders by Admiral Chichagov and General Wittgenstein frustrated this plan. By November 16, the crossing was over, crossing the Berezina. However, the Grand Army ceased to exist. Armand de Caulaincourt testified, after the crossing, the hulls began to melt again. Before our eyes, new bands of stragglers arose. The First Corps existed only in the person of standard-bearers, several officers and non-commissioned officers. On November 23, in Smorgon, Napoleon handed over command of the army to Marshal Murat and rushed off to Paris. Discontent broke out in France, a conspiracy arose, and Bonaparte had to fight for his power there. Napoleon had no doubt that he would be able to recruit new troops and maintain his dominion over France and Europe. The Bulletin of the Grand Army of December 3, 1812 made a stunning impression in France and Europe. It did not name the numbers of losses, but the true state of affairs was recognized, the defeat of the previously invincible army. The last phrase of the bulletin seemed especially strange: His Majesty's health has never been the best. At the Berezina on November 16, 29, 1812. Without an escort, without security, accompanied by Count Caulaincourt, for 13 days Napoleon rushed through all of Europe, sorting through the events of the Russian campaign in his memory and pondering plans for the future. Having lost its leader, the French army suffered new defeats. On November 28, Russian troops occupied Vilna, where Kutuzov ordered to stop for a rest, and the remnants of the French army numbering about 23,000 people crossed the Niemen on December 14, taking out 9 guns out of 1,400. The French left the borders of Russia after a severe defeat. The military genius of Napoleon was great, but not omnipotent. Russians in Paris, or the end of Napoleon. On December 21, Kutuzov, in an order to the army, congratulated the troops and urged them to complete the defeat of the enemy on his own fields. The Patriotic War, which the Russian army and the Russian people waged against the invaders, ended, but in order to ensure a lasting peace, Alexander I set out to crown this victory with the final defeat of Napoleon. Napoleon or I, but together we cannot reign, the king said. In January 1813, foreign campaigns of the Russian army began. Now Prussia, Sweden and Austria are becoming our allies, and England is sending its troops to the continent. The troops of the new allies were more numerous, but Napoleon still had significant forces. Siege of Paris. The Allied armies were defeated at Lutzen, Bautzen, Dresden, but Napoleon suffered defeat in the battles near Kulm and near Leipzig. It was obvious to everyone that without Russia this would not have happened, that if the Russian army had remained within its native borders, Napoleon's domination would have continued in Europe, Austria would remain his ally, and Germany would be divided into semi-independent, semi-vassal principalities and duchies. Holland, Belgium would not have national independence. It was not for nothing that the Germans later said, "We owe our real independence to the union with Russia." By that time, Kutuzov was no longer alive. The old Field Marshal Prince Smolenski died in April 1813 in Bunzlau. On June 13, 1813, during the funeral service for the deceased in the Kazan Cathedral of St. Petersburg, Archimandrite Filaret, Drozdov, uttered an inspired word about the commander, ending like this: Russians, you all unanimously wish that the spirit given to Smolenski would not cease to walk in our regiments and rest on our leaders. There is no better praise than this for the departed, there is no better instruction for the remaining sons of the fatherland. Allied forces enter Paris. The command was again taken by Barclay de Tolly, and it was he who happened to accept the surrender of the French capital. On March 18, Russian troops triumphantly entered Paris. Emperor Alexander I rode at the head of the regiments on a white horse, donated by Napoleon. He was accompanied by the Prussian king and the generals of the Allied armies. Crowds of French, tired of the war, hailed the Russian Tsar as a liberator. In a conversation with the deputies of Paris, the king assured them that the Allied armies would behave impeccably towards the inhabitants. Any manifestation of violence would be severely punished. "I am not at war with France, I am a friend of your country," Alexander I emphasized. Ross in Paris. "Where is the torch of vengeance? Hang down, Gallia, head, but what do I see?" Ross with a smile of reconciliation. Coming with a golden olive. More military thunder rumbles in the distance. Moscow in despondency, like the steppe in the midnight haze. And he brings the enemy not death, but salvation. And good peace to the earth. A.S. Pushkin. Memories in Tsarskoye Selo. The Parisian aristocrats and commoners were amazed at the kindness of the Russian soldiers and Cossacks, who pitched tents on the Champs-Élysées in the center of Paris. Good-natured Cossacks allowed Parisian children to climb on their shoulders. The royal court and the generals attended balls given in their honor by the French nobility. Subsequently, Alexander Pavlovich told Prince A.N. Golitsyn, "Our entry into Paris was magnificent. Everything hurried to hug my knees, everything tried to touch me, people rushed to kiss my hands and feet. They even grabbed the stirrups, filled the air with joyful cries and congratulations. But my soul felt another joy. She, so to speak, melted in boundless devotion to the Lord, who created the miracle of his mercy. In a word, I wanted to speak and partake of the holy mysteries, but there was no Russian church in Paris. Merciful Providence, when it begins to do good, then it is immeasurable in its ingenuity, and now, to my extreme amazement, they suddenly come to me with a report that the Russian church, so desired by me, has appeared in Paris. Our last ambassador, leaving the capital of France, handed over his embassy church for preservation to the house of the American envoy. On March 25, April 7, on the day of the Annunciation of the Most Holy Theotokos, the sovereign, after the vigil, confessed, asking everyone for forgiveness with great and touching humility, according to an eyewitness. On March 26, he received communion with great reverence. Private Lifeguard Semyonovsky Regiment I, Galchenko. On March 29 and April, on the first day of Holy Easter, at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, on the Place de la Concorde, where the unfortunate Louis XVI ended his life, a prayer was held for the last victories of the Allied forces and for the capture of Paris. Alexander Pavlovich himself described this event in a conversation with Prince A.N. Golitsyn. "I'll also tell you about a new and gratifying moment for me in the course of my whole life. I then vividly felt the apotheosis of Russian glory among foreigners. I even carried them away and forced to share our national celebration with us. At the place where the meek and kind king fell, an ambo was made by my order. All the Russian priests that could only be found were summoned, and now, in the presence of countless crowds of Parisians of all conditions and ages, loud and harmonious Russian singing was heard. Everything was silent, everything was listening. According to the Orthodox ritual, the Russian Tsar prayed publicly together with his people and thus, as it were, cleansed the blooded place of the stricken royal sacrifice. Our spiritual triumph has fully achieved its goal. It involuntarily thrust reverence into the very hearts of the French. I can't help but tell you, Golitsyn, although this is incompatible in the current story, that it was even amusing to see how the French marshals, how the numerous phalanx of French generals crowded near the Russian cross and pushed each other in order to be able to venerate it as soon as possible. Medal, in memory of the Patriotic War of 1812. On March 25, 1814, Napoleon signed his abdication and was exiled to the small Mediterranean island of Elba. He was tormented by impotent regrets. After all, having captured Moscow, he himself brought the Russians to Paris. Prior to that, on April 12, he tried to poison himself, but the potassium cyanide, which he carried with him since the time of Mala-Yaroslavets, apparently decomposed. France was ruled by King Louis XVIII of the Bourbon dynasty. Napoleon still tried to regain power, fled from Elba, but the troops loyal to him in the summer of 1815 were defeated at Waterloo by the Allied armies. Thus ended the Patriotic War. In her memory, a medal was established, on which there is no image of the Russian Tsar, but there are the words, not to us, but to your name." Two remarkable monuments were erected, the military gallery in the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg and the Cathedral of Christ the Savior in Moscow. The Russian Tsar has a chamber in his halls. She is not rich in gold, not in velvet. It is not in her that the diamond of the crown is kept behind glass, but from top to bottom, full length, all around. It was painted by an artist with a quick eye. No dancing, no hunting, but all raincoats and swords. Yes, faces full of martial courage. Crowd close, artist placed. Here the chiefs of our people's forces, covered with the glory of a wonderful campaign, and the eternal memory of the 12th year. A.S. Pushkin. Commander, Cathedral of Christ the Savior. A photo. 1890s. On December 25, 1812, on the Feast of the Nativity of Christ, in Vilna, Alexander Pavlovich signed a manifesto which said, to preserve the eternal memory of that unparalleled zeal, loyalty and love for the fatherland with which the Russian people exalted themselves in these difficult times, and to commemorate gratitude to the providence of God, which saved Russia from the death that threatened her, we set out to create a church in the name of the Savior Christ in the capital city of our Moscow. However, this decision was preceded by a lot of controversy. Initially, there were proposals to erect a traditional monument in honor of a military victory, a column, an obelisk or a pyramid of cannons taken from the enemy. This idea was shared by Count F. V. Rostopchin, who suggested to the Tsar in a letter dated December 20, 1812, that the monument should certainly be built in Moscow, and who had already begun to collect cannons for the construction of the pyramid, which, according to his calculations, required at least 800. But on December 17, Admiral A.S. Shishkov received a letter from General Pavel Andreevich Kiking, who for the first time put forward a proposal to build a memorial church to Christ the Savior in Moscow. This war, wrote P.A. Kiking, should decide the fate of Russia, shake the foundations of its civil and political ties, and even faith itself is not ordinary. Why should the monument be the same? The providence of God, with the help of faith and popular zeal, has saved us, thanks to him. Emperor Alexander I, 1823. God forbid we become senseless monkeys of ancient monkeys, forgetting that we are not idolaters. Obelisks, pyramids, and the like flatter human arrogance and pride, but in no way satisfy the noble, grateful heart of a Christian. And so my heart and mind agree to erect a temple to the Savior in Moscow under the name of the Sparsky Cathedral, which alone can satisfy the expectations of everyone in all respects. This idea made a deep impression on Alexander I. On October 12, 1817, the first temple was laid on the Sparrow Hills according to the project of A. L. Wittberg, but the project was unsuccessful. In 1838, during the reign of Nicholas I, the younger brother of the victorious Napoleon, a new temple was laid near the Kremlin, which became a monument to the miraculous victory in 1812. Name Index. Russian Army. Bhagavat Karl Fedorovich, 1761–1812, Lieutenant General, in 1812 commanded the 2nd Infantry Corps of the 1st Western Army. In the Battle of Borodino, after the wounding of Tuchkov first, he commanded troops in the area of the Utitsky Kurgan. Killed by a cannonball at Tarutino, Bagration Pyotr Ivanovich, 1765–1812, an outstanding Russian commander, in 1812, an infantry general, commander-in-chief of the 2nd Western Army. Mortally wounded in the Battle of Borodino, where he held the Semyonov, Bagrationov, flashes for 6 hours. Barclay de Tolly Mikhail Bogdanovich, 1761–1818, an outstanding Russian commander, in 1812, Field Marshal General, Commander-in-Chief of the 1st Western Army. In the Battle of Borodino he commanded the right flank. Benyingsen Leonty Leontovich, 1745–1826, Cavalry General, in 1807 Commander-in-Chief of the Russian Army, in August, November 1812 Chief of the General Staff of the Russian Army. Removed from office for intrigues against M.I. Kutuzov. Wittgenstein Pyotr Christianovich, 1769–1843, Cavalry General, in 1812 he commanded the 1st Infantry Corps in the army of Barclay de Tolly. After the death of M.I. Kutuzov he commanded all armies for some time. Vorontsov Mikhail Semyonovich, 1782–1856, Lieutenant General, wounded in the Battle of Borodino. In 1813 he distinguished himself in the Battle of Leipzig. Head of the 2nd Consolidated Grenadier Division as part of the 2nd Western Army. Golitsyn Dmitry Vladimirovich, 1771–1844, Cavalry General, in 1812 he commanded a Cuirassier Corps which distinguished itself at Borodino and Krasny. From 1820, Moscow Governor General. Golovin Yevgeny Alexandrovich, 1782–1858, Major General, in 1812 he commanded the Fanagoria Grenadier Regiment of Bagration's army. Gorchakov Andrei Ivanovich, 1779–1855, Lieutenant General, in the Battle of Borodino led the defense of the Shevedinsky redoubt, where he was seriously wounded. Deparadovich Nikolai Ivanovich, 1766–1843, Lieutenant General, in 1812 he commanded the 1st Cuirassier Division in the army of Barclay de Tolly. Dibich Ivan Ivanovich, 1785–1831, Lieutenant General, in 1812, Chief Quartermaster of the Wittgenstein Corps, in 1813, Quartermaster General of the Russian Army. Dorokov Ivan Semyonovich, 1762–1815, Lieutenant General, in 1812 commanded the rearguard of Bagration's army. In the Battle of Borodino, he led the attack of the 2nd Cavalry Brigade near the village of Semyonovskaya, which detained the enemy. For distinction in this battle he was promoted to Lieutenant General. Dokhtyarov Dmitry Sergeyevich, 1756–1816, General of Infantry, in 1812 he commanded the 6th Infantry Corps. He distinguished himself in the Battle of Smolensk. Under Borodino, he commanded troops in the central sector of the Russian position. After Bagration was wounded, he was commander of the left flank of the Russian army. Ermolov Alexei Petrovich, 1777–1861, Lieutenant General, in 1812, Chief of Staff of the Army of Barclay de Tolly. In the Battle of Borodino, he led a counterattack at the Raevsky Battery, during which he was wounded. Zakrevsky Arseny Andreevich, 1783–1865, Adjutant General, in 1812 he was with M. I. Kutuzov, General of the General Staff on duty, in 1813–1814. Served under Alexander I. Kaisarov Paisy Sergeyevich, 1783–1844, at the beginning of 1812, a colonel, commanded a separate detachment. For distinction in the Battle of Borodino, he was promoted to Major General. During the pursuit of the French army, he commanded the vanguard in the corps of M. I. Platov, Kicking Petr Andreevich, 1775–1843, in 1812, Major General, General on duty in the army of Barclay de Tolly. Konovnitsin Pyotr Petrovich, 1764–1822, General of Infantry, from August 19, 1812, head of the general rearguard of the 1st and 2nd Western Armies. After Bagration was wounded, he temporarily commanded the 2nd Army. Kulnev Yakov Petrovich, 1763–1812, Lieutenant General, in 1812 he headed the vanguard of Wittgenstein's corps. Heroically died in the Battle of Klyastitsi. Kutaisov Alexander Ivanovich, 1784–1812, Major General, in 1812 he first commanded the artillery of the army of Barclay de Tolly, and under Borodino, all Russian artillery. Killed in the Battle of Borodino while repulsing an attack on the Raevsky Battery. Kutuzov Mikhail Ilarianovich, 1745–1813, the great Russian commander, Field Marshal, at the beginning of the Patriotic War of 1812, was elected head of the St. Petersburg and then the Moscow militias. From August 1812, Commander-in-Chief of the Russian Army, which defeated the troops of Napoleon. Miloradovich Mikhail Andreevich, 1771–1825, Infantry General, participant in the Suvorov campaigns, commanded the troops of the right flank in the Battle of Borodino. On August 28, 1812 he was appointed Commander-in-Chief of the 2nd Western Army and Chief of the rearguard of the army. Neverovsky Dmitry Petrovich, 1771–1813, Lieutenant General, in 1812 he commanded the 27th Division, which he formed in Moscow from recruits. In the Battle of Borodino, most of the division died, he himself was seriously wounded on the Semyonov flushes. Osharovsky Adam Petrovich, 1776–1855, Lieutenant General, in 1812 he commanded a separate, flying, detachment in the pursuit of the enemy. Osterman Tolstoy Alexander Ivanovich, 1770–1857, Lieutenant General, in 1812 commanded the 4th Infantry Corps, distinguished himself in the Battle of Borodino and in 1813 at Kulm. Paskovich Ivan Fedorovich, 1782–1856, Lieutenant General, later Field Marshal General, 1829, as a brigade commander took part in the battles near Smolensk, Borodino, Vyazma. In the Battle of Borodino, he commanded the 26th Infantry Division, which directly defended the Raevsky Battery. Platov Matvey Ivanovich, 1751–1818, Cavalry General, Ataman of the Don Cossacks. In 1812 he commanded a Cossack corps. He distinguished himself in the Battle of Borodino, having made a successful raid together with the cavalrymen F. P. Uvarov and V. Orlov Denisov in the rear of the French army. Raevsky Nikolai Nikolaevich, 1771–1829, Lieutenant General, in 1812 commanded the 7th Infantry Corps of Bagration's army. He became famous for the courageous defense of Smolensk and in the Battle of Borodino for the protection of the Central Battery, which went down in history as the Raevsky Battery. Says Lavin Alexander Nikitich, 1780–1858, in 1812, Captain, later, Lieutenant General, Adjutant to Barclay de Tolly. From September 1812 he commanded a cavalry detachment in the region of Borovsk and Moscow. He was the first to discover the retreat of the enemy from Moscow. Stroganov Pavel Alexandrovich, 1774–1817, Lieutenant General, in 1812 he commanded a consolidated grenadier division in the Tuchkov Corps. He distinguished himself in the Battle of Borodino. Tolkal Fedorovich, 1777–1842, Lieutenant General, in 1812, Quartermaster General of the Army of Barclay de Tolly, and then, of the United Russian Armies. Tormasov Alexander Petrovich, 1752–1819, Cavalry General, at the beginning of the Patriotic War of 1812 commanded the 3rd Western Reserve Army. With successful operations in the Kiev direction, she diverted significant enemy forces. Tuchkov Nikolai Alexeyevich, 1765–1812, Lieutenant General, in 1812 he commanded the 3rd Infantry Corps, a participant in the battles near Ostrovno, Smolensk. Mortally wounded in the Battle of Borodino, Tuchkov Pavel Alexeyevich, 1775–1858, Major General, in 1812 he commanded the rearguard units of the 2nd Infantry Corps of the Army of Barclay de Tolly. Under Volutina Gora, he held a very important position. During the last counterattack he was seriously wounded and taken prisoner. Tuchkov Alexander Alexeyevich, 1778–1812, Major General, in 1812 he commanded a brigade, participated in the battles near Vipsk, Smolensk. He was killed in the Battle of Borodino, when, with the banner of the Revel Regiment in his hands, he led a brigade in a counterattack at the Bagration Flushes. Uvarov Fedor Petrovich, 1773–1824, Cavalry General, in 1812 commanded the 1st Cavalry Corps of the Army of Barclay de Tolly, then the entire cavalry of the combined armies. Figner Alexander Samoilovich, 1787–1813, at the beginning of the Patriotic War of 1812, Captain, later, Colonel. He became famous for successful partisan actions in the rear of the French army. He died on the banks of the Elbe during the battle with Ney. Chichagov Pavel Vasilievich, 1767–1849, Admiral. As the commander-in-chief of the Moldavian army, he made peace in 1812. In 1813, on the Berezina, he did not have time to capture Napoleon. French army. Beauharnais Eugene Napoleon, 1781–1824, Napoleon's stepson, Viceroy of Italy. In 1812 he commanded the 4th Infantry Corps of the Napoleonic Army, distinguished himself in the Battle of Borodino. During the retreat of the French army, he was in its vanguard. Davoust, Louis Nicolas, 1770–1823, Marshal of France, Prince Ekmalski, in 1812 commanded the 1st Infantry Corps, wounded in the Battle of Borodino. During the retreat from Moscow, he commanded the rearguard of the French army. Junot, 1771–1813, Duke d'Abrantes, Marshal of France, associate of Napoleon. In 1812 he commanded the 8th Corps, but after a failure in the Battle of Volutina Gora, he was dismissed by Napoleon. Lannes Jean, 1769–1809, Marshal of France, Duke of Montebello. In the Napoleonic Wars he commanded troops at Austerlitz and Jena, in Spain. Murat Joachim, 1767–1815, Marshal of France, King of Naples. In 1812 he commanded the cavalry of the Napoleonic army, was defeated at Tarantino. After Napoleon left the army for Paris, he led the retreating army. Ney Michel, 1769–1815, Marshal of France, a participant in all the Napoleonic Wars. In 1812 he commanded the 3rd Infantry Corps. In the Battle of Borodino he commanded the center of the French army. Auguste Jean-Pierre, 1772–1836, French general, in 1812, head of the corps. Sebastien E. Horace, 1775–1851, Marshal of France, in 1812 he commanded a corps. Thank you for downloading the book from the royalib.com free e-library, http://royalib.com. Leave a review about the book, http://royalib.com/comment/Yakovlev_Alexander/Voyana_Otekist_Venaya_Voyana_Goda.html. All books by the author, http://royalib.com/author/Yakovlev_Alexander.html.